Hello, everybody, and welcome to this 12-hour edition of Practical Ethical Hacking. My name is Heath Adams, and I'm going to be your instructor for this course. A really quick who am I? I am a husband, ethical hacker, teacher, and when I have time, gamer, sports fan, and animal dad. I am the business owner at TCM Security. We are a cybersecurity consulting and education firm. I do what is called ethical hacking, meaning companies pay us to attempt to break into them. It could be through a network, wireless network, a web application, even physical pen testing like a building. Anything that they want us to try to hack into, we're happy to do it. And there's careers out here that involve ethical hacking. It's actually a booming industry right now. And a lot of people are coming into this industry from unique backgrounds. Like, for example, I was an accountant and I ended up in this industry, and I've seen doctors, dentists, lawyers, all kinds of random backgrounds that have just come to this industry and found homes here. So if you're interested in ethical hacking, this course is designed for you to kind of brush you into the basics, help you understand what an ethical hacker does and some of the techniques. And it's going to be all hands-on. I am not a PowerPoint person whatsoever. So this is the little bit of PowerPoint that you're going to get at the beginning of the course, and then we're going to get into heavy hands-on techniques. So if you're interested in finding more out about me, I am very approachable. You can find me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, here on YouTube. I would love if you hit the subscribe button, comment, hit the like, let me know how you enjoyed the course. And of course, you can find me on Twitch as well. We do live streaming, some ethical hacking streams, some Q&A, et cetera, et cetera. Down below, you see sites. TCM Security is the consulting side of the business. The academy is the educational side, and the certification side is the certification side. So I'm going to cover that really quick and what this course is and what we're going to do in this course. Okay, so welcome to Practical Ethical Hacking. This is 12 hours of 25 hours of a course. So full disclosure, this is not the complete course, though this is a course that takes you through the first half and gets you to a good stopping point. So reviewing the curriculum, I'm going to scroll down here, and I'm going to link everything in the description as well. We're going to cover a few things in this course. We're going to talk about note keeping. We're going to go over computer networking and also Python. So if you've never used Python or if you've never done anything with computer networking, we're going to kind of cover that. And so we'll cover some of the foundational skills before we get into ethical hacking. And that does include note keeping and setting up a lab and installing Linux and running through Linux as well. So we built all the foundations in this course before we start getting into ethical hacking. So once we get through Linux and Python and we get through our computer networking, we start getting into the ethical hacker methodology. We talk about the 5 stages of ethical hacking, and then we start getting into information gathering. What information can we gather about our target? We can look at social media. We can look at finding email addresses, finding intelligence about these companies or individuals or whoever it is that we are paid to target. And we'll do that through information gathering and reconnaissance. There's a bunch of different techniques that we can do. Then we'll move into the next phase, which is scanning and enumeration. We're going to have a intentionally vulnerable machine that's presented to us. We're going to scan that with tools that you learn throughout the course, identify what vulnerabilities might exist within the machine, and then we're going to eventually start hacking it. So we'll get into exploitation and talk about how we can hack a machine, understand the basics of exploitation, and then eventually hack a machine. Once that has all been said and done, we're going to go ahead and move into a capstone. So we have 4 to 5 boxes, actually 5 boxes that we have built ourselves, and we allow you to download those, you run through those, and you try to attack those. And your goal is to hack into these machines. So you go through all these, and that is your capstone, your end to your 12 hours of your course. Now, this is the only time I'm going to try to sell you anything is going to be the next 30 seconds to a minute. If you are interested in continuing on with the course, it does cover exploit development, Active Directory, which is probably the coolest thing ever. It's my favorite thing to teach, and how to hack into Active Directory, which you can see there's a lot of Active Directory attacks here. We go into post exploitation, we go into web application enumeration and the OWASP top 10 web application attacks. We do a little bit of wireless pen testing, legal documentation, report writing, and career advice. And we do sell all of our courses for $30. Full disclosure, we have about 12 courses at the time of this recording. If we go to the homepage, we could see all of our courses here. So we've got everything from Linux and Python all the way down to open source intelligence, different types of pen testing and advanced pen testing, mobile pen testing, malware analysis, phishing. Everything is no more than $30. And that is the only time I'm going to sell you on anything again. So last but not least, we do have a certification side of things. If you're interested in the certification, this course, it leads to the practical network penetration tester certification. If you want to find out more about that and why that's cool and industry changing, feel free to go to certifications.tcm-sec.com. And with that being said, I am done pitching you, selling you anything for the rest of this time being. Let's get into 12 hours of free material and start covering how to become an ethical hacker. Let's go ahead and get this course started. Before we dive into this course, I want to talk about a day in the life of an ethical hacker. And I want to talk about why I love ethical hacking or penetration testing, and what I do on a day-to-day basis, what kind of engagements you might find yourself in as an ethical hacker, and then the soft skills and technical skills I think that you should have in order to be successful in this field. So let's go ahead and first look at why pen testing. So why pen testing? Why for me? Well, I work from home. I roll out of bed at like 7:55 in the morning. I'll get my coffee ready. I'll go to my desk. I'll make it there by 8. And I am ready to go. I don't have to sit in traffic. I don't have to drive to work. I save so much time out of my life just by working from home. It's a great luxury. I love the lifestyle. It's not for everybody, but a lot of penetration testing nowadays is working from home. And another great thing about pen testing is the salaries are incredibly high. My first job in the field was over 6 figures, meaning over $100,000 in this field as a first year pen tester. So it's incredible money, and it's very lucrative moving up. Anywhere from a senior pen tester can make $150,000. A manager can make somewhere around $170,000 to $200,000. And really the sky's the limit, especially if you go out and you do your own business or your own consulting. The salaries are very, very high because this is a very technical field, and there is a job shortage or people shortage right now. We have more jobs than we have people, so that relates to high salaries as well. On top of that, the benefits are great. The work-life balance is great. Again, this boils down to where you work, but for me personally, I'm working 40-hour weeks. My benefits have been fantastic through and through. And I love the lifestyle, right? That work from home, that 40 hours a week. I was an accountant before I got into penetration testing. And let me tell you, I was working 60-hour weeks, 70-hour weeks. I was in the office all the time. And I was going in when it was dark, and I was coming home when it was dark. And it just, can easily lead to depression doing that. I've not experienced any of that in penetration testing, and I am really, really happy for it. So on top of all this, it is mentally stimulating. This is one of the best fields. I am what I consider a lifelong learner. I like to learn. I am nonstop learning, right? And I have that personality type, and you're going to find that if you enjoy this field, it's never going to feel like work to you. I could sit here and I can pen test for 80 hours and it never feels like work to me. It is just mentally stimulating. It's a puzzle. There's always something new to learn. There's always a new attack out, and there's always a new defense out as well. So somebody's always trying to block your attacks, and it's this cat and mouse game. And if you do not stay up to date or on top of things, you're going to get left behind. So you have to have that mentality in this field where you're always willing to learn and you like learning. And that's really, like, for me, that's a positive to pen testing because I enjoy that. And lastly, of course, It's legal breaking and entering. Who doesn't like that? I get to break into buildings, I get to break into websites, into networks, and people pay me to do it. I cannot believe that this is a job. When I first heard about it, I was like, no way. Hackers are bad guys, right? But hackers can be good guys too, and we can get paid very lucrative salaries. So from here, let's talk about a day-to-day lifestyle. So day-to-day here. What's guaranteed, most basically should be guaranteed, is that I roll out of bed. I'm still relatively young, and I have several different types of assessments that I can do, and this really isn't all of them, but this is the ones that I do the most. Now, I have what is an external or internal network assessment, and we're going to cover those quite a bit in this course. But when we're talking external network assessment, that means that I'm evaluating a network from the outside. I could be in China, I can be in the United States, I could be in Russia. It doesn't matter where I'm attacking from, right? I could be in any country at any time attacking this network. So I'm on the outside looking in. The internal is different. We assume at this point that we have breached the network. We have a Dropbox, we've got some sort of code execution on their network, we logged into their VPN. It doesn't matter, somehow, some way we're on that network. What can we do once we're inside the network? And what that means is we're going to be talking a lot about Active Directory pen testing, and that's really what it corresponds to. And this course is going to hit very, very heavy on Active Directory because of this. And so you have two different types of network pen tests, and the methodology is very similar. The attacks and tool sets are very different. So they can almost be split apart into their own subsections, but you will have external pen tests, internal pen tests on the network side. You may be asked to do web application penetration testing. So that is assessing a website, right? You have a website or an application that is given to you, and you want to see if you can break that website, if you can log in as an administrator or get somewhere that you shouldn't be able to get to, and you just want to evaluate the security posture of that website. So there are a lot of tools and methodologies out there for that, and we're going to cover the OWASP top 10 in this course when we talk about that, which is big when it comes to testing web applications. So from there, we also have what is called wireless penetration testing. That is the evaluation of a wireless network. So we'll go on site, we'll try to hack into the wireless, we'll look at the guest network and see if there's any segmentation or not. Should a guest be able to sign in and access the same network that somebody who is logged in as an employee should access? The answer is no, but it happens quite a bit. We'll also look for rogue devices and see, what might be out there that is interesting to us. Well, we'll talk more about all these different assessments when we get into their respective sections. Now, there's also what is called physical or social or phishing. There are three different types, but they fall into social engineering. Now, physical assessment is where you go on site and you try to break into a building. You have a destination in mind, maybe it's a server closet or some critical location in the building that they don't want you to get into. This could involve picking locks, social engineering a lot of the time, cloning badges, and just making your way into this building through whatever methodology you can. Now, social engineering and phishing, those are, kind of hand in hand. You'll do a phishing campaign or a social engineering campaign, or even a vishing where you're calling on the phone and you're trying to get information. And you're just after, what kind of credentials can I get? Who clicks on my links? What kind of passwords do I get, etc. We also have what is called SOC assessment. So a SOC assessment is also known as purple teaming. And purple teaming is when you combine red and blue. So as a penetration tester or ethical hacker, you're often known as red, and a defender is often known as blue. So you combine those and that makes purple. And what that means is we'll sit down with a blue team as an offensive team. We'll sit down with a blue team and we'll say, hey, what attacks do you want us to try to run? Or we're going to run these attacks, and I want to know if you pick it up. So I might run a specific attack and see if the blue team detects it. I might go plug into their network and see if it prevents me from plugging into their network. Do they get an alert on that? If not, how can we help them baseline this attack to get this alert? So I think purple teaming assessments are some of the best assessments that are out there, because not only do they learn from you and what attacks are out there, but you learn from them on how to defend against these and how to bypass these too, because maybe your first attempt does get blocked and you're like, hey, maybe I should, run a different attack and see if you catch that. And it's a great way to have that cat and mouse game again. So once we do these types of assessments, we have to write a report. We have to report back on what we saw and tell the client about it. And I put a little sad face there because, not everybody likes writing reports, but it is absolutely part of the job. You have to be well written in this field to be successful. So, you write this report and you're going to have to present this report to a client. And that's what is the debrief. Now, a debrief is where you take the report and you give it to a client and you walk through it with the client and say, here's what's wrong, here's why it's wrong, and here's how we can fix that for you. Or here's how you can fix that, right? And so you have to have this technical skill set as a penetration tester, and you have to have this well-written skill set. You have to be able to write well. You also have to be able to talk in front of people when it comes to doing debriefs and talk to people. That doesn't mean you have to be an extrovert by any means. You can be an introvert. I am very introverted, but you have to be able to put that personality on when you're on site. Same thing with the physicals, by the way. If you're on site for a physical, you do not have to be an extrovert to be successful. I know plenty of good physical pen testers that are actually introverts and do just fine as long as you're able to get into that mindset for that temporary time period. So anywhere from all these different assessments that you could end up doing at any given time, you have to be well-rounded there. You're going to be writing reports and you're going to be presenting reports to clients. Now let's talk about the technical skills that you are going to need. And our course here is going to cover a lot of these. So at a base level, you really do need to know Linux, preferably Kali Linux, or what another type was called Parrot. There is networking that you should know. You should be familiar with the OSI model, certain protocols like TCP, UDP, HTTP, etc. You should have good scripting skills, whether it be Python scripting or Bash scripting, etc. there. And you should have a solid hacking methodology. And this is all what we would want as a base for an interview. You should have also tool familiarity, right? Metasploit, Burp Suite, Nessus. If all this sounds like a foreign language to you, that's fine. Come back and watch this video again once you've gone through the whole course, and it's going to all click for you. And you're going to say, hey, I know a lot of this. And on the preferred side, Active Directory is huge. If you know Active Directory, you're going to be ahead of the game. Most people, when I interview them, they have a good base, but they don't have that good preferred side. And we like the preferred column a lot, okay? So Active Directory, super important. Wireless attacks, important to know. The OWASP top 10, also important to know. That is related to web application penetration testing. And lastly, coding skills. So scripting and coding, a little bit different. Scripting is what you'll be using primarily. Coding, you don't have to be a coder to be successful in this field at all, by the way. If you only script for the rest of your life in this field, you'll still find plenty of success. However, you can code new tools, things, contribute to the community with it. We'll talk about that here in a second as well. But just know that the base is potentially can get you into a job. The preferred will definitely get you into a job if you have strong knowledge on that side, along with the base knowledge. Lastly, something that is not covered much is the soft skills that you need to be a pen tester. So yeah, it's great to be technical, and we already talked about the social people skills, right? Because you're going to be doing that debriefing, you might be doing social engineering, etc. And you're going to have that well-written ability to you as well. But let's talk about some of these other ones. You need a strong desire to learn. You should be the type of person or that personality type that always wants to learn. And we talked about it, right? Where you should be the guy or girl that wants to go home and study, and you find this fascinating, and that desire to learn is going to benefit you because of that cat and mouse game, because something that you knew yesterday might not be an exploit today. Patches are coming out all the time, and you have to stay ahead of the game because of this cat and mouse game. So that strong desire to learn, super important. If you do not stick up with your studies, you're going to get left behind. And most people have this desire to be in the field of ethical hacking because they think it's sexy, it sounds cool, and it is cool.
But if you do not have that desire to learn, you do not have that perseverance, which we're going to talk about, you're going to get left behind in this field and you're not going to be successful. So let's move over to perseverance. You have to have this perseverance mindset, not with just that desire to learn, but also that ability to not give up, because the answer is not always there in front of you. And you're going to see this as we go through the course. It's not cut and dry. It's not, hey, I scan for this, I see an exploit, I go exploit it. You might have to do a lot of research. It might look like the machine that you're attacking, it has no exploits available to it. And you have to be able to put in that persistence to be able to persevere. You have to have that mindset where I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep trying at this until I have exhausted all my potential resources. That is what makes a good hacker. Okay, that mindset of I'm not going to quit really makes a good hacker. Now, on top of that, non-complacency. This kind of falls into that strong desire to learn. Now, I've had coworkers that are completely happy. When I was working help desk, when I was working in networking, plenty of coworkers who are happy with their jobs. They've been in the same position for 5 years, 10 years. You cannot be that person if you want to be a pen tester. You always want to learn more. You always want to move up. You want the most out of yourself, okay? Don't be complacent. If you're complacent, you're going to get left behind. I'm beating the dead horse here, but it really is true. Like, you're going to get left behind if you're not constantly studying and if you stay complacent. Lastly, you should have a blog or Twitter or GitHub or something that you contribute back to the community with. It could be a YouTube channel or a Twitch stream or however you want to do it, right? You should give back to the community. When I see that somebody's giving back to the community on their resume, even if it's a blog post or Twitter, whatever, it really helps. And things that you're going to get asked in an interview include where you get your news from, and how do you do you have a blog? You're going to be asked that, and Twitter is a great place to get news, and a blog's a great place to give back, and Twitter's a great place to give back too. So make sure you're contributing to your community. It'll really help you in the long run. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It could be a blog that somebody's posted before or 20 people have posted before. As long as you're posting it and it helps you learn, and it helps your style might be something that helps somebody else learn as well, compared to the other blog posts where maybe people didn't like that writing style, or they didn't like that, commentary, or however it is. So you never know how your content is going to help somebody else. So I always encourage people to go out there and make their own content. So that's it. And I know this is a long video. This is going to be longer than most of the videos, but I wanted to dive in and really cover what you can expect as an ethical hacker and what you need really at a technical and a soft skill level to be successful. So from here, we're going to go ahead and get right into the course. Next up is effective note keeping. We're going to talk about the importance of note keeping, what tools you should use to be keeping notes for this course, and then we're going to dive right into the technical concepts. So I'll catch you over in the next video.
So before we begin in this course and we really start to dive in, it's important to cover one of the topics that I'm going to harp on the most, which is effective note keeping. If you're going to be successful in your career and you're going to be successful in this course, you really need to take good notes. Now, in this first video, I'm going to show you what my notebook kind of looks like, not only for my personal notebook, but as a notebook for an assessment and how I might take notes for an assessment. And then I'll also show you some note keeping applications that I prefer or I've heard students prefer. In the second video, we're going to cover how to install one of the applications and another cool application used for taking screenshots. So let's take a look at my notebook first. So here is my notebook, and actually let's click over here. So this is my notebook, and you can see it's really long. It's got all kinds of stuff in here, and it's just something that I build upon. This one in particular is actually only geared towards Active Directory. So I have a few different notebooks. This one is Active Directory, and it's actually a few different courses that I've taken in the past that I've kind of put together. And then just for assessment work, etc., I just kind of have a little cheat sheet here. So I wanted to show you this one in particular because these were built off of courses, and you're going to be working through a course, so kind of just get an idea of how maybe to structure it. So here you can see I structured it,
And I've got different modules here where, okay, module 1 might have had this email macro fundamentals. Module 2 here has all these different components to them, right? And we have our notes, then we have child notes, and even sub children to those child notes. And I'll show you how to create that here in a second. But let's say, for example, enumeration, which is one of the most important things that you're going to cover in hacking. And we take a look at enumeration. You don't have to understand what any of this means here. But you could see if I want to look at a domain and I want to get the current domain that I'm on, here's the command I run. And here is a picture of what it looks like. And here's what comes back when you run that command. That's great. That's what I want to see. And I have a whole list of commands for all of these in here, right? So if I'm confused on a assessment and I want to go and find a command that I'm not sure of, I can go to my little cheat sheet here. Now, again, this is really long, so you have to create your notes the way it really helps you. For a course, I think it's good to write it all out step by step like this, and then go back and make a cheat sheet. I don't need these pictures anymore. I've been doing this for a while. So maybe I just say, hey, get current domain is get net domain. And then I say, hey, okay, get object of another domain. Here's an example of it. I don't need the pictures because it makes it really long. But as an example, and over time, you learn with the pictures as well. At least I do. So let's build from that. Here is an example of an actual assessment that I did for a client. And you can see how I did this. Now, I did an external, internal, and web application assessment for this client, and these were the findings. Now, I'm only going to show you what is masked or obfuscated already or doesn't reveal client information, but as you can see here, one example is on the internal, they had something called SMB signing disabled. You don't need to worry about it, but here in my picture, I've got a nice picture. The picture has highlighted, it says, hey, message signing disabled, that signifies SMB signings disabled. And it has the IP address. So we identified the machine and we give proof of concept that this SMB signing is disabled here. Another example, MS17010. These are both internal exploits that you're going to encounter in this course. Here's one. I checked this machine. It says, hey, this target's not patched. Now this is one I didn't exploit, but it shows that it's actually vulnerable to this attack. So these are a couple screenshots that I'll put. Now, your notes could be different than mine. How I organize is I take a screenshot, I put it in here, and then I make sure that I have at least the IP address and the screenshot for reference because I'll remember it. But if you need to go in here and take detailed notes, that's absolutely fine as well. You always want good notes for your assessments because you never know if a client's going to come back in 6 months or even a year and say, hey, what was that one thing that you did here? And if you go back to your notes, you say, oh, I did this. And some people get down really into the weeds. They have dates, times, everything for step-by-step what they do on an assessment. And that's completely up to you and how well you take your notes. This is kind of how I lay it out. And then you see the green check marks next to it. I add those green check marks when I'm doing my report. So as I'm building my report out and I cover something in the report, I'll just go ahead and right click and I'll change the note icon to a check mark, meaning that I've written that part of the report for that finding. And we just kind of go through over time. So with that being said, I do want to show you some decent applications. The one that I'm using here and that you see is called KeepNote. Now I run on Windows as a base. So keepnote.org, that's how you get KeepNote. It is for Linux, it is for Mac OS X, but this is totally a preference thing. Me, I prefer it. I've been using it for a long time. Some people don't like it, okay? So I'm gonna offer some alternatives as well. Cherry Tree comes built into Kali Linux, as you're going to see here in just a little bit. Worth looking at, worth trying, seeing if you like it. OneNote's another example if you use Microsoft. And if you're a Mac user, a lot of students have told me that Joplin is really good. Now, I've never used this, but I keep hearing great things about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all of these into the course resources, and you'll be able to look at them, download them, decide on your own. Now, you're not limited to these 4 note-keeping applications by any means. Feel free to use whatever you like to take notes. If you want pen and paper, that's great as well. And so just make sure that you're taking good notes. And we're gonna harp on this throughout the entire course over and over and over again. So make sure you're taking good notes. So from here, what we're gonna do is we're going to install KeepNote in the next video. and we're going to install an awesome tool called GreenShot. And I'm going to show you what GreenShot does and why it's so cool, and I cannot live on any assessment without it. So let's catch you over in the next video when we work on installing those tools. All right, so in that example in the last video, we talked about using KeepNote. So if you go to Google and you type in KeepNote, all you gotta do is come here, and KeepNote works on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS X. So great tool. The only issue with this tool is it has not been updated in a long time. Some people find issue with that. If you're one of those people, I'm actually not, you can use other tools. OneNote is an option. Cherry Tree is also an option. You can also find other options out there for you. If you have a favorite note-taking tool already, that's absolutely fine as well. Just make sure to take good notes, especially during this course, and make the most of it. Learn all the things that you can and incorporate that. So I will show you quickly how to install KeepNote here. And another thing to note too is while we do this is Cherry Tree is available on Kali Linux. We're going to install Kali Linux here very soon. So once we install Kali Linux and we get into the introductory Linux and we explore it, I'll show you a little bit more of Cherry Tree and what that looks like. And we'll talk pros and cons of Cherry Tree when we get there. So here we go. If you are on Windows, you can follow along, or you download your appropriate one here, depending if you're on Linux or if you need Mac as well. So I'm going to go ahead and install the exe, and I'm just going to actually run this. We're just going to say yes, and I'm going to say next, install. And that's it. I mean, it's that quick. And then we just launch KeepNote, and here you go. We've got KeepNote. So the other tool, the really cool tool that I love, this one is called GreenShot. Now this is a screenshot capturing tool. So let's go to downloads here on GreenShot. If you are running on something other than Windows, or Windows or Mac, so basically Linux, you're going to need a different tool. The recommended tool that I've heard out there is called FlameShot, Flame. Though I have no experience with it, I've heard it is identical to GreenShot. So here I'm going to download the latest stable. I'm going to select run. Yes. Okay. Accept the agreement. Give away our firstborn. Next. Place it however you want. I'm just going to next through everything. And I'm going to start GreenShot with Windows Start. That is my preference. I love this tool again. So it's finished. All right, let's take a look at it. So it should be running. Let's start GreenShot now. Okay, now you see it running down here on the bottom. Okay, let's go. Let's open up a web page. Let's say we want to take a screenshot of something. Now you just hit your print screen button, and this nice cursor gets brought up here. And let's say we want to just take this downloads part right here. We're just going to capture this. And now we have choices. We can just save the image that we just grabbed. Or my favorite is that we can actually just open in an image editor, right? So let's open this in their image editor. Look at this. Okay, so here's the picture we just grabbed, right? On top of this, really great tools. Let me show you two that I use always. So I come into effects, I put a border on it. Let's say that you have like a Kali Linux, and Kali Linux, if you've never used it, has a black terminal. It's really nasty. So let's imagine here that it's black. It's nasty when it comes to reporting. So let's imagine that we're in this situation and we're writing a report and we've got this black background similar to this. Well, you can see what I just did. I just inverted it. And I do this for all of my reports. I invert the Kali background. So that way it's white. And that way it looks nice on a report. And when we get into the reporting, you'll kind of see what that looks like. But I like a nice clean background. It saves on ink as well if they were to print it. And it's just nice and neat when you give it to a client. So I always invert my images if I need to. You've got the black border here. Another thing is, let's say you want to point something out. You saw in my KeepNote notebook that I had a highlight. You can just click that button up here and just highlight something, like right here. Great. Another tool that's in here is this obfuscate. So let's say that there's like a password or something really sensitive in here that you don't want the client to see, or you don't want to reveal on a final report. You can do that, and then you can just like up the pixel size on this and make it really blurry, you know? So it's a really, really great tool. And then when you're done, you can copy it to your clipboard. You can save the file. I just usually like copy this, and if I want to go paste it, like, you know, make a new notebook or whatever, I'll just paste it in my KeepNote and just kind of go from there. So again, fantastic tool. awesome to use. If I had two recommendations for your note keeping, it's KeepNote and GreenShot. If I had to make one recommendation out of the two, it's absolutely GreenShot. You can be flexible on your note keeping tool. So again, hopefully this helps you. Again, please do take good notes through this course. You're going to find yourself wanting to know, hey, what was that command I ran again? And because we're going to go through so much stuff by the time this is all said and done that you're going to want to remember it. So please take good notes. So from here, let's go ahead and move on into our networking refresher, and we'll catch you in the next video. Hello everyone, and welcome to this section on networking. So this section is titled Networking Refresher, meaning that some of you might have a networking background. And if you're looking at this list that's on the screen and you go down the list and you say, yep, I know all those, you can feel free to skip this section. If you've taken some of these in the past and you just might want a little bit of a refresher on them, then this section is for you. We're going to cover these topics not totally in depth, but we're going to use it as a way to brush up. And then we'll hit on networking again when we get into introductory Linux. So if you are unfamiliar with things like TCP, UDP, and the three-way handshake, or if your subnetting's a little shaky or you don't know what the OSI model is, chances are you should probably stick around and just click through this series, watch it, and build that foundation. Remember, we talked about one of the core foundations of pen testing being a strong networking background. This is a good way to build it up, remember what you might have forgotten, and go from there. So let's go ahead and just jump right into the first video, which is going to be IP addresses. What's up, everybody? So I'm going to preface this video really quick with that it is raining pretty hard here. So if the soothing sounds of the rain put you to sleep during this video and you can hear it, I'm very, very sorry, but the show must go on. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be talking about IP addresses. Now, if you've ever used a computer before and you're anywhat familiar with IT, you probably know what an IP address is. But I want to take this a little bit deeper in theory on why we use IP addresses, what types of IP addresses are out there, and talk more about protocols and how IP addresses are actually designed and made up. So I'm here in a Kali terminal, and I'm just going to type in a simple command, and that command is ifconfig. Now, if you've used Linux before, this might be familiar to you. If you used Windows, it's similar to ipconfig. All I'm trying to do is bring up my IP address. So what we can see here is that we have an IP address, which is our inet. This is my IP address here. I also have another IP address, this inet6. This is what's called an IPv6 address. So we've got this inet, which is considered an IPv4, and this inet6, which is considered an IPv6. Now you can notice right away that there's two different types of notations for these. This inet here is in a decimal notation, and the IPv6 is in a hexadecimal notation. We'll get to the importance of that in just a second. So when it comes to IP addresses, this looks probably pretty familiar to us. This is an IP address. This is how we communicate. We communicate over layer 3, and you're going to hear me talking about layers repeatedly throughout the course, or at least throughout this part of the course, so that we can get familiar with how we're actually doing this. So I want you to be familiar with troubleshooting these layers, and these layers all refer to something called the OSI model. So when we talk about layers, we think about the OSI model, and I'll introduce the OSI model here in a few videos, and it should all click once I introduce the OSI model. So if I brought in the OSI model up front, it might be boring, might not make sense. So I'm going to introduce the OSI model near the end, and you're going to say, hey, yeah, that all makes sense. So what we've got here is we've got this IPv4 address, and this is the most commonly used format that we use today, right? We use IPv4 for mostly everything. And again, this is in that decimal notation. So when we see this decimal notation, it's just realistically a bunch of ones and zeros that are put together so that we have this human readable format. Realistically, all we're seeing here with 192, this first section here, this first octet, is actually just a bunch of ones and zeros. It's 8 bits. So we've got a range of 8 ones and zeros here. We've got another 8 here, and 8 here. So when it's all said and done, this INET, or this IPv4, is made up of 32 bits, 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 8 here, and which equals 4 bytes. So another way to think about that is to think about it as, say, something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, period. Okay, that is one section there. So we've got 8 ones that can make up this, and then we'd have another 8, etc. I'm not going to beat a dead horse here. But I do want to give you guys another example. So if we go into our applications and we go to a text editor really quick. So the way this looks is something like this. We start with a number like 128. I'm going to try to space this out as best as possible. And all I like to do is think of 128 as my base. And this will make a lot more sense when we get into subnetting. So please, if you're confused by this, don't worry. This is all theory right now. When we get into subnetting and we get hands-on, it'll make a lot more sense, I promise you. So let's say we have ones and zeros here. If we have a 1 for each of these sections, and I'm going to space this out again as best as possible, it's not pretty. But if we have a 1 for all these, this equals 255. Why does this equal 255? Well, you take this, and all these numbers add up. 1 plus 2 plus 4 plus 8, all this adds up to 255. So let's say if we didn't have all the ones and zeros, we had just some ones enabled, like these last 3 here. Okay, well, this would equal 7, because we have 4 plus 2 plus 1 equals 7. So our first number, or whatever number this applied to in the octet, would be 7. So if we had 7.7.7.7, it would just be this numbers repeating over and over. These numbers repeating over and over, right? So be 0.0000111 dot 0.0000111 and so forth. So this is kind of what it looks like behind the scenes, because again, a computer is just ones and zeros. We're all binary. So what we're going to do is we're going to close this out. And we're going to talk a little bit of other theory when it comes to this, and why INET or IPv6 and why IPv4. So let's close this and let's talk about IPv4. So I'm going to bring up a calculator. And with IPv4, we have these 32 bits. So what we can do is we could take 2 to the 32nd power. And this is the possible amount of IP addresses that we could have. So we have somewhere in the 4 billion range of IP addresses. Well, spoiler alert, we don't have only 4 billion people on Earth, right? We're up to 7 something billion at this point, and all these IP address spaces are gone. So IPv4 has been around since 1981. Nobody thought we were ever going to use all these addresses. Computers weren't really a thing. Who knew that we were going to want all these addresses? And these companies started buying them up, and they started buying them up in large chunks. And then they sold those to ISPs, and then ISPs sell those to you. And so these IP addresses have been gone for a very, very long time. And chances are when you have an IP address and you get this IPv4, you're only going to get one. If you're a corporation, you might buy more, but we've run out of IP address space. There's just not enough to go around. So the theory is, okay, let's come up with something different. Let's come up with IPv6. Now, this hexadecimal is actually in 128 bits, which makes things just a little bit longer and adds quite a bit. So let's take this 2 to the 128 power, and we get a number that I cannot tell you how to say, not even going to try. But I can guarantee you that in our lifetime, we will never use this address space. So we've come up with a solution of IPv6, but nobody really uses it. IPv6 is just a thing that's there, but when we get IPv6 addresses assigned, but still to this day, everybody's using IPv4. Well, how is that possible if we're using IPv4, but we're out of address space? Well, think about this. We're using something called NAT, which is Network Address Translation. Now, let's think about your network. So you might have a cell phone or computer or multiple devices. My network has at least 20 devices on it. I've got cameras, I've got multiple cell phones, smart TVs, everything that connects to my internet gets an IP address. And that's 20 IP addresses right there, right? So let's say I have 20 devices. That's 20 IP addresses. Am I taking up 20 IP addresses out of that 4 billion? No. We're actually using something called network address translation, or it's called NAT for short. And we'll talk about this again when we set up our actual lab. But with NAT, what we're doing is we're assigning these private IP address spaces. So we've got this 192.168.57.139. Now, if you've ever seen a IP address before and you've been on a network, good chances are it probably started with 192, or maybe it started with a 10 dot or something along those lines. And that's because those are private IP addresses. So anything that starts with 192.168 is not an IP address that is going to be out in the interwebs. It is going to be an IP address that is only known to you. These are called private IP addresses. So because we use these private IP addresses, we can pass them out through what is called a public IP address. Now, to make better use of this, let's go out to Firefox, and I've already got a tab open. So I went to Google and I just said private IP addresses, and I clicked the second image here because I think it's a great image. So if we look at this, there are classes of IP addresses, private IP addresses. Now, there is a class D and E. We're not going to worry about those. The big three are class A, B, and C. If you know these, you are good to go. So if we look at class C, this is what the most common household and small business use. So we see it starts with the 192.168.0.0. So the 192.168 are constant. If you see a 192.168 address, you can guarantee yourself that that is a private IP address space. And then we have the range of changing this number between 0 and 255 and this number between 0 and 255. Why 0 to 255? Well, that'll all make sense when we get into subnetting. But what that allows us to do is have a large number of networks here and a small amount of hosts. But for a regular user like you or I, or a small business, 254 hosts is pretty good. I mean, I'm only using like 20 in my household. So the most common household is probably using this 192 address. But what about a big business, right? Something huge. Okay, well, they might use a 10 address because a 10 address frees you up to anything after this 10 is private. So 10.1, 10.1.1.1, whatever you want to put in here up to 255 on each octet makes for a small amount of networks, but a large amount of hosts. Okay, and don't worry about the host versus network thing. Again, subnetting, we'll talk about that. It'll all make sense. But just imagine the amount of hosts that you can put in here with this wide range. So because of this, you'll see larger corporations using 10 addresses. You'll also see a lot of corporations, even small businesses, using 10 addresses. The matter of fact is, as long as you have this private IP address, you're good to communicate across your network. So any IP address outside of these and the loop back here are free game for the public address space. They're probably already owned, and you purchase those or rent those really from your ISP, your internet service provider. So going back to this thought, we have a class C address. My network's class C, 192.168.57.139 here. So it falls into that class C. I've got all these devices on this 192.168 network. All these devices are talking out of one IP address. That is my public IP address. That is what I rent from my ISP. And all of this network traffic goes out one IP. So this is how we have achieved or solved the issue of running out of address space without having to use IPv6. Not that there's anything wrong with IPv6. It's not pretty. I mean, it's way easier to type this stuff in than it would be to type something like this in. But at the same time, this is how we've solved it. We're able to still use IPv4 in mostly all networks, and we are able to communicate out with this quote-unquote IP address shortage. So hopefully that makes sense. We're going to build upon these concepts. Again, IPv4, IPv6, IP addresses are layer 3 protocols. Layer 3 is a router. So when we route traffic, we route via an IP address. So we're going to build upon that as well as we go in. Hopefully this is all just a refresher to you. So that is it for this video. I'll go ahead and catch you over in the next one. All right, so we're going to move down a layer here and talk about layer 2. So remember, IPv4, IPv6, IP addresses as a whole, that is layer 3. We're talking about routing. Here in layer 2, we're going to be talking about a MAC address or a physical address. Now, MAC stands for Media Access Control, and that is identified here in our ifconfig as this ether here. So we can think of this as our physical address and a way that we communicate when we are using switches. Switches communicate over this physical address. This is kind of how they know what device is what. So what we say here is if we have a device, say you just built a computer and you're installing your network interface card or your NIC, you're going to plug that in and you're going to have a MAC address for that NIC. Your cell phone, that's going to have a MAC address. Anything that's using a network interface is going to have a MAC address. So these MAC addresses are important because they utilize layer 2 or switching, and they are how we communicate over switches. Now there's something to be noted briefly about MAC addresses. Now MAC addresses have identifiers. So as you can see here, this MAC address has 6 different pairs of 2, right? And what we can do is we could take the first 3 pairs and we can just copy this and we can go out and we can try to put it into a MAC address lookup. Now for this one, this is just going to be VMware. I'm not sure if it's actually going to come up, but I'm going to go ahead and paste it and see what happens. And you can see that the vendor actually shows up as VMware. So the first 3 pairs here are identifiers, and we can identify what we're up against. If you've ever looked in your house and you've looked at your network and you're trying to find a device and you see the IP address, but the IP address doesn't really help you identify it. You might see something along the lines of a MAC address because your home device, say your router, might also be what's called a layer 2/layer 3 device, meaning it's doing switching and routing for you. And it'll also know the MAC address of that device. So you can take the first 3 pairs here, put those into the Google machine and see if you can identify what that device is. So if I was unsure, this didn't have a host name or device name, and I could just reach out and say, okay, well, let me look these up. Maybe it'll give me an inkling. It's not going to tell me the exact device, but if I know it's running VMware, then I can say, oh, that's my host machine running. Or if it's related to like Texas Instruments or something, maybe I know that device in my house. So this is just a quick way to look up devices and know about them. The other option or other thing that you need to know here is just that, again, MAC addresses, layer 2, related to switching. I'm just trying to repeat this and get this into your head. So that's all we need to know from this lesson. And we're going to go ahead and I'll catch you over in the next lesson. All right, so now we're moving into layer 4, which is the transport layer of the OSI model. And we're going to talk about what is TCP and what is UDP. So we'll type that in here, TCP versus UDP. So TCP is what is known as the Transmission Control Protocol. And you could think of that as a connection-oriented protocol. And we also have UDP, which is the User Datagram Protocol. And this is a connection-less protocol. So when we have these 2 protocols, one is best suited when it comes to high reliability. That's TCP. TCP is connection-oriented. We want to make a connection, we need high reliability. So you can think of something like a website, which is HTTP or HTTPS. Or you can think of something like SSH or FTP, the file transfer protocol. Those all utilize TCP. When you think about UDP, you might think about something like a streaming service, that's connectionless, or DNS is connectionless, or voice over IP is connectionless. And when this comes into the importance of scanning is super important. We're going to be scanning both TCP and UDP as a penetration tester. And don't worry about scanning right now. When we get into the scanning section, this will make a lot more sense. but we need to know what TCP and UDP are and define them broadly. So the most commonly used protocol that you're going to be scanning is going to be TCP. Now, TCP works on what is called a three-way handshake. Now, if we look at the three-way handshake, it's going to look something like this. We're going to first send out a SYN packet, and then we're going to receive back a SYN ACK packet, and finally, we're going to send an ACK packet. Now, how does this work? Now, you could think of this as an interaction. So let's say you have a friend or a neighbor, and you go to your neighbor and you say hello. That's a SYN. Now, SYN ACK is going to be the response. It's going to say, hey, SYN, I acknowledge you. That's your neighbor waving hello back. And then you know you are good to go start a conversation. So that's the acknowledgement. Now, when we think about this in the terms of ports, now port is a item that can be open on a machine. It's a way to communicate with certain protocols. For example, if you think about HTTP, that's over port 80. If you think about HTTPS, that's over port 443. There's a lot of different protocols, and there are 65,000 plus ports that can utilize these protocols. So everything related here has to do with these ports. Now, let's say that you want to connect to port 443 on a website. You're going to send out a SYN packet to that website. You're going to say, hey, I want to connect to you on port 443. And if 443 is open and available for connection, they're going to say, hey, you can go ahead and connect to me. And when you want to actually establish that connection, you're going to send that acknowledgement packet back. Now, let's make more sense of this. Let's go ahead and open up a tool called Wireshark. So this is built into Kali Linux. I'm just going to type in Wireshark, and I'm going to provide an ampersand here just so I have shell access if I need it in the background. And all I'm going to do is capture packet data. So this is going to be listening in on my NIC, and it's going to say, hey, what's he doing? Let's capture all that data. So we're going to capture that. I'm going to start a capture here. You're going to start to see a bunch of traffic coming through. You can see the different protocols here. You could see UDPs coming through right now. But we're going to go establish a TCP connection. So let's go out to the World Wide Web. And I've got Google up. I'm just going to refresh Google. You're going to see a lot of traffic start coming through. So I'm going to go ahead and just stop this right here. Look at all the data packets that get sent when you're using your computer. This is what's going on in the background. You don't even think about it. So we could see some SYN ACKs there. Those are in the gray. Let's see if we could find a good one. Okay, so here is one right here. So what we're going to do, actually, let's find a better one. So we're going to come down to here, and we're going to say, okay, so here we are. We're our source IP. This is 192.168.57.139. We're going out to destination of 74.125.21.155. We're saying, hey, I've got this port here. I want to connect to your port. So port 443, this is a web page. We're sending a SYN packet. If that port is open and available for connection and communication, what's going to happen back is that IP address is going to say, hey, here I am. I'll allow you to connect on this port. And if we make that final connection, we're going to go ahead and send the ACK packet back, which is right here. It's going to say ACK. So that is the three-way handshake. Please do remember this is going to come back into play when we get into scanning, and we'll talk about stealth scanning and how we modify the three-way handshake to actually do some scanning. So that is it for this lesson. I will catch you over in the next one. All right, so before we go into the OSI model, I do want to talk about some common ports and protocols. Since this is a refresher, most of these should be pretty familiar to you. I'm going to run through them pretty quickly and just talk about them briefly on each of these common ports. And the reason I've listed these is because there are things that we'll see quite often as a penetration tester. And it's just something that as we're going through the course, if one of these show up, it's something that just rings a bell and you see a scan, it comes back and you see port 21, you just think, ah, yes, FTP. Or you see port 80, you think, ah, yes, HTTP. So you got to start training your mind to memorizing these ports. So when we get into our scanning, which again, we haven't covered scanning, but when we get there and we see what ports are open on a machine, we're going to be able to have these common ports memorized. So on the TCP side, we've got FTP. FTP is the file transfer protocol. You're going to see this in some assessments. You're going to see this a lot when we do something called capture the flag, where we run through some test machines. You'll see FTP open quite a bit. So FTP, file transfer protocol, All that means is we can log into this server, we can put a file, or we can get a file off the server. Now, SSH and Telnet kind of play hand in hand. Telnet is the ability to log into a machine remotely. Now, SSH does the same thing. The only difference is SSH is the encrypted version of that. So with Telnet, you are in clear text, and with SSH, you are encrypted. Now, SMTP, POP3, and IMAP all relate to mail. We're not going to worry too much about mail in this course, but you might see it come back up at some point. So just remember your 25, 110, and 143. DNS. So DNS is a way to resolve IP addresses to names. And we could take a quick look at that if we go back to our Kali machine and say we're at Google here. We've got Google up, but the computer doesn't really know what Google is. The computer is just using nice text like google.com for us, the humans. What's going on the back end is Google actually resolves to an IP address. Now that IP address is how the computer knows to get back and forth. Because we don't want to sit there and type in IP addresses, this DNS or domain name system has been implemented for us. So we type in google.com. On the back end, it knows, hey, I want to go out to 179.10.22.34, whatever it is in reality. But this is just a quick way for the computer to relate to a human and the human to have easily readable access to some of this stuff. So going back to our PowerPoint, we have HTTP and HTTPS. That is a website, just what you saw there. Mostly everything is on 443 now, or HTTPS. The HTTP on port 80, you'll see sometimes. Remember, that is the non-secure version of the protocol. So HTTPS is encrypted, HTTP is not encrypted and not secure. So lastly, SMB ports 139 and 445. Originally, it was just 139. In the later versions of Windows, they put on 445. You're going to see these ports a lot. This is probably the most common port you're going to see as a pen tester. These relate to file shares. You might also hear this called Samba. So there are a few names for it, but when you think of SMB and you see 139 or 445, think of file shares. And as a pen tester perspective, you got to think about all the crazy exploits we've had regarding SMB. The most recent one as of this course was the WannaCry virus, right? So you had the WannaCry virus. It's also known as Eternal Blue, was what it was built off of, or MS17010 was the official term of that exploit. That exploit utilized an SMB exploit to navigate through networks. So it became very vicious very quick because SMB is open so frequently on networks. Now, on the UDP side, we also have DNS over here. DNS is both a TCP and UDP protocol. We also have DHCP. Now, when it comes to IP addresses, DHCP associates you with an IP address kind of at random. Now, you could have the opposite of that is what is a static IP address. So with DHCP, you plug into your network, say your home network, and the internet just fires up. Guess what? Probably DHCP on the back end. It just picks a number between a range, says, hey, here's your IP address. I'm going to let you lease that out for 8 hours or a day or a week or however long the timing is set for. And that IP address is yours. Now, the opposite of that, again, is static. So you could say, hey, I want a static IP address. And anytime I plug in with this specific computer, go ahead and give it this IP address. So how are we going to know that? Most likely the MAC address, right? So from layer 2, it's going to know layer 3 and how to assign it. So again, DHCP should be pretty familiar to you. We've also got TFTP on port 69, which is the trivial FTP, and it utilizes UDP instead of TCP. And we also have SNMP, which is the Simple Network Management Protocol. So you will encounter SNMP occasionally on networks, not always, but when we do encounter it, there may be some information to be gathered, especially if there are strings being used that are community or public strings. And we'll worry about that when we encounter it, but you'll probably see it again in this course. So that is it in this video. We're going to go ahead and move on to the OSI model and tie all this together. Then we'll get into a little bit of subnetting, and we'll end this with a refresher on networking, a final final video on networking. So I'll see you over in the next video. All right, so this whole time we've been talking about networking, and I've been throwing terms at you, and every time I throw a term at you, I try to use the respective layer for it. So you've heard me say layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, and those all correspond with what is called the OSI model. Now, if you're ever in a network interview, or if you're ever talking to somebody who has experience in networking, or even if you're on the help desk taking tickets, knowing the OSI model is incredibly helpful, and people will just throw layers at you, especially the people who have been in the field for quite some time, might just say layer 2 instead of a switch, or they might say layer 3 instead of a router. So I'm going to discuss the OSI model really quickly, give you a mnemonic on how to remember it, and just talk about some of the concepts within it and how to troubleshoot down it as well. So I picked this up from Keith Barker a long time ago. Great trainer, by the way. And this is the mnemonic. So we're going to go P, D, N, T, S, P, A. And this stands in my head for please do not throw sausage pizza away. Again, that is please do not throw sausage pizza away. So I'm going to put numbers corresponding to the layers in front of it here. And we're going to go ahead and type these out one by one. So on the first layer here, we've got what is called the physical layer. And you could think of your physical layer as like data cables or like your Cat6 cables, stuff like that. Something you might plug in, right? That is the physical layer. And we've already talked about layer 2 quite a bit. Layer 2 is the data layer, and that is our switching, right? And also our MAC addresses. Going down the list, we've got the network layer, which is IP addresses. Also routing. The fourth layer is the transport layer, which is TCP, UDP, which we have talked about as well. And the last few, so the session layer, we've got the session layer, which is just session management. You don't really have to worry too much about this one. 6 is the presentation layer. Now, this should be familiar to you because think about WMV, JPEG, movie files. That's what your presentation layer is, so media. And then lastly, we've got the application layer, which is like HTTP, SMTP, your applications that you utilize, right? So we've got this laid out here, and you might be asking, why is this important? Well, again, when we say something like, my home router is a layer 2-3, so that means it does switching and it does routing, right? You might think of this in another way as well. You might be asked to troubleshoot. And something to talk about too with the OSI model is when we receive data down this physical layer all the way down to the application. When we transmit data, it goes out the application layer down to the physical. When we're troubleshooting this, it is always best to start with the physical and go down to the application level. Okay, so say you're working help desk and you get a phone call and somebody says, my internet's not working, help me. Well, what's the first thing you're going to do? Are you going to ask them application level questions? Probably not. You might say, hey, can you look at the back of the computer? Do you see the cable plugged in? Oh, the cable's plugged in. Okay, well, do you see the where the cable's plugged in? Is there a blinking light? Is that blinking light green by chance? Okay, we're checking the NIC, right? And then we might ask them to, do they have an IP address? What's going on? All the way down. And then we troubleshoot all the way down to layer 7. So we wouldn't start on layer 7, right? We would start from the basics and move down. So it's important to know this. This isn't a help desk course by any means, but it's super important to know this, especially if it's been a while since you've seen this network stuff, or even if this is new to you, that the OSI model is commonly referred to. Even as a pen tester, I get all kinds of layer 2, layer 3 talk, and you will be sitting in meetings with network engineers with people who are very, very smart about this stuff, and they're going to throw all this lingo at you. So if you know this lingo, really, really benefits you, or else you're just going to sit there and wonder what the heck they're talking about. So hopefully this is a quick, informative method for you. And again, remember, please do not throw sausage pizza away. That's the easiest way that I remember it. You can make up your own mnemonics if you want. People have other things as well. If you've got a favorite mnemonic, please feel free to comment down below and tell me your mnemonic as well. So I'd love to hear some of these other ones. So let's go ahead and move on into subnetting, and then we'll start moving into other fun parts of the course. Let's talk about subnetting. So subnetting is important in networking. You hear about it all the time. You hear even people perhaps freaking out. I know I freaked out when I heard that I had to do it for exams like Network Plus or CCNA. And I feel like there are a lot of complicated methods out there for subnetting, but there was a method that was shown to me middle of my career, and it just blew my mind. It's really, really fast subnetting method. And I really want to break down for you what subnetting is, why we do it, and then show you the methodology behind it. So if we want to talk about subnetting, if we just come in here and just do an ifconfig, and we look at our IP address, right? We have our inet, which is our IPv4. And you can see here too, we have this net mask. This is also known as a subnet mask or a subnet. And it just says 255.255.255.0. Doesn't really tell us a lot if we don't know much about it, but this is what a subnet looks like. And we can think of subnets in ones and zeros. It's all bits, right? So we've got 8 bits here, just like an IP address, IPv4, same thing. 8 bits, 8 bits, 8 bits, and another 8 bits. And we've got ones and zeros. If all the ones are switched on, we've got 255. If none of the ones are switched on, we've got 0. And depending on how those ones and zeros are switched on or off determines a lot of things for us. And that's why this net mask is important. Now, attached to your resources for this course, I've created an Excel sheet that I think will be useful. So if we look at the Excel sheet, here is the CyberMentor's subnetting sheet. And let's talk through this. It looks like a bunch of numbers and it might look crazy for you. And we're going to talk about how this breaks down, how the bits break down, and then how I would write this shorthanded for an exam or a test or just something that I do on a day-to-day basis. So first, let's talk about the bits. So come to the bits tab here, and we have our 8 bits, right? We can count this across, and there's 8 here on the count, and you can see that. And it starts with 128 and descends down to 1. You just keep cutting it in half, right? So 128, 64, 32, 16, 8, whatever. What's more important is why we get to these numbers. So if we have a 1 switched on here, it adds to the value. When all the ones are switched on, it equals to 255. You see all the ones switched on here. If we were to highlight over all this, come down to the sum, you see the sum is 255. That's all this formula is doing here. So if we were to come through and you see all the zeros here, nothing's flipped on to actually turn any value on here. How this actually works is the switch has to be on in order, right? So if we were to switch on another bit, we'd have to switch it on here. And we'd have to switch another one on here. We couldn't just come down here and switch it on here. It wouldn't make sense. It doesn't work that way, not with subnetting. So we're going to take these back off and just show zeros again. But you see how the values change. If, for example, we had this network and you saw the default, and I'm showing you the 255, 255, 2550, the standard here, because that is what's known as a /24 network. That's very, very common. And it's very common because it's used mostly in households and small businesses. And it's done this way because of the amount of hosts that it allows. Now, if we talk about the host, you can see that I have here 2 to the 8th power. Why do I have that? Well, we actually go by how many bits are switched off or how many hosts are available to us. So if a host here or a bit was switched on, then we lose the amount of hosts we have available to us. And this subnet gets smaller and smaller. Now, don't worry too much about the ones and zeros. It's going to make a lot more sense when we stop talking in these binary terms. I just kind of want to break down the math behind it first before we make it really, really simplistic. So again, we're talking about what's called this /24 or WAC24 network. And it's so standard because of the host. Again, 256. Think of all the devices in your house. You have cell phones, you probably have computers, you might have like a Roku or Amazon Fire or something along those lines. You might have smart TVs or smart watches or something that connects to the internet. Well, again, they're all connecting through NAT, right, and going out, but the amount of hosts that you can have on your private network really depends on this subnet mask and how you set it. So we have this class C that you saw before, the 192.168.1 or .0 or however you want to have it, right? Well, it allows us to have 256 when we have a subnet of /24. So that's very common for a household. It's also common for a small business. Maybe there's a printer, some few devices in there, but they're never going to get over this 256 hosts. Okay, so when we come to the subnet cheat sheet, let's break this down a little bit differently. So we have our host here. Let's start with the /24 where we just were. And you saw that there is 256 available hosts. As we start turning off bits, okay, we turn off a bit here, we turn off a bit, keep going down the list, the hosts start getting bigger, and that just corresponds here. We have a /24, and the only reason I'm saying 24 is I'm counting the ones across, right? So we got 24 bits switched on. If we had 23, okay, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, let's stay away from the ones and zeros. I think it's a little bit complicated. The better way to think about this is to look at the subnet mask down here. And I'm going to replicate this, and then we're going to come back to it. So what I do here is we can have a possibility of 32 bits switched on, right? So I'm just making a new tab, and I'm just going to go over here, and I'm going to hit Control and drag this across till it hits 8. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing with 9. I'm going to drag it across. All I'm doing is just making, really quickly, 32 placeholders. And I'm just emulating here if we had the possibility of 32 different switched on bits. So imagine one bit is switched on. Imagine all 32 bits are switched on. That's the possibilities here, right? So always, for sure, we're going to have an amount of hosts, and we're going to have a subnet mask, okay? So we'll just call it subnet there. We always start here with 128, just like the bits that you saw. You saw the 128 start on the bits. Let's just start also with 128. Now, as you saw, every bit that's switched on, remember when we switch a bit on over here, it starts decreasing. So we're going to decrease for the bits that are switched on. 64, 32, 16, 8, 4, 2, 1. You come over here, and what I like to actually do is I like to just add these numbers together. And you can see 128 and 64 is 192. And then you can add these two together. So you get 192, 32. You just add diagonally is the way I actually always do it. So 224, 240, 248, 252, 254, and 255. Now, what does that correspond to? It corresponds to the possibilities of the bits being flipped on, right? So this looks just like what you see here. Same deal. And if you had a 1 underneath of it, okay, then you got 128. If you've got another 1 underneath of it, well, guess what? You've got 128 plus 64, which is 192. And this number keeps growing. Why is this important? This is still all ones and zeros, right? Well, let's start thinking about it. If we have a /24 network, we've got 24 bits turned on. Our subnet mask is 255.255.255.0. If we had a /16, it becomes 255.255.0.0. Why? Where are these changes coming from? Let me show you this. Okay, for a /8, I'm just tying this in just this right here. Well, this is coming from the number of bits that are turned on. 8 bits turned on, we've got 255, and the rest are zeros. You got another 8 bits turned on, 255, 255, the rest are zeros. Come down to this /24, which is that really common subnet that you see, and you've got 255, 255, 255, 0. Now, this is very common, okay? Let's go back to the cheat sheet now. And you can see that I've got X as a placeholder in the subnet. So what I'm saying here is you look at this list and you say, I've got a /1. Well, for this whole area here from 1 to 8, the placeholder is going to hold in place of this X. So for a /1, if I've got 128, then guess what? It's going to become 128.0.0.0 because that's how it would be. And if you turned on just one bit here and made all of these zeros, guess what? Just the 128 would be on, the rest would be zeros. Okay, if we had a /14, okay, so 255's automatically flipped on. You have a /8 already, you passed through it. Okay, so you're starting on the second iteration here. /14 corresponds down here to 252. So you'd have a 255.252.0.0. So all this is placeholders. Let's go back to the sheet here. So I make this quick and dirty list. This is what I write out when I'm just writing out something quick for an exam. I'll write out 1 through 32. I'll put the host here and I'll put the subnet here. So again, if we know that once we cross through 8, 16, 24, 32, that has a 255 in front of it, all we've got to do then is we'll say /27. Well, we've come through 3 columns. Then I know for sure that we've got 255.255.255. something, right? You see the /27, you come down here, the subnet would be 224. Say 28. Okay, 255, 255, 255. Look at the 28, you've got a .240. And this is going to be confusing. Subnetting is not necessarily easy. Once you get the chart down, it makes a lot more sense. So let's start piecing some more things together. When I say that I've got host, now the host that I'm showing you only correspond to these first rows, but it's very common or very useful just to know this number right off the bat. Now, if you look at the cheat sheet, what you can do here is you just know that you start with a 1 or you start with the 128 and you go down, but every time you go up, you're doubling. And why are we doubling? Do you remember from the bits part? Every time a bit is turned off, so as we go up a number, we take it to the next power. So we've got 8 bits turned off, we take 2 to the 8th power, it's 256. Well, here you go. Look, come through here, 256, we go to the 9th power, 512, to the 10th power, 1024. It just keeps doubling, okay? That's all you got to think about in your mind, is it keeps doubling. So on an exam, for example, you might have something like, how many hosts could be potentially in a /20 network? And you come to your cheat sheet that you made or you have in your head and you say, well, 496, and then we'll get to this in a minute, but we have to subtract 2. So 494 potential. And why is this all important? What do we even care about any of this? Why am I rambling on? Well, you need to know based on the network. Okay, the /24 is great for a small office, home network, however you want to have it. But what if you're a large enterprise? Maybe you have thousands of devices, okay? Maybe you want a /16 network. That might make more sense for you. Or you even see some with a /8 network. It just depends on how big the company is. The larger the company, the greater chance that you're going to see that they're not using /24. Or they could even have subnetted segments of their network where, say, they have just telephones and they've got 500 employees and 500 telephones. They might just have one /23 network for nothing but telephones because that's the amount of hosts that fit in there. So what we're after with subnetting is how many hosts can we fit and what is the mask that's behind it? So those are questions you might be asked in an exam, and these are questions that you're just going to see. And when you're given addresses, say you're doing a pen test for a client, you might be given something like this. You might be given an IP address, 192.168.1.0/24. Okay, and immediately in your head, you're like, oh, /24, that's standard. There could be up to 256 hosts or 254 hosts or devices in this network. But if they gave you something like 192.168.1.0/20, then you might look at your little chart and say 4,094 hosts. Remember, we're going to subtract 2. 4,094 hosts in this network. Now I know if I'm scanning this, I'm up against a lot more devices potentially than I am in this. Okay, so when a client gives you your subnets, they might just write it out like this. And depending how big your client is, might depend on how big their subnets are for you. For example, I just pen tested a client that was a /16 all the way across. And it looks something like 10.1.0.0/16. Okay, and your subnet mask for that would be something like 255.255.0.0. And how does this come into play? Well, every time you have a 255, that number's locked in place. That's another way to think about this. So that 10 is always locked down. This 1 is always locked down. The rest of the bits are fair game, meaning we could have 10.1.1.0.1.2.3. We could actually have a 0 here, 0.1.2.3.4. And that's how this number for like a /16 gets so big, because you have 10.1.0.0 through 255 on the possibilities, which equals 256 hosts. Okay, for one range, you get 256. Well, imagine you have to do that 255 other times, right? And that number gets substantially bigger here. And then if you were to have a /8, then of course it gets bigger and bigger. So what you need to realize are a few things here. We have these addresses, and you see the /1, /8. Again, we call them WACs. WAC 24 is going to be very common. I would say WAC 16 is probably your next common. You might see some weird subnetted networks like this, but typically it's /24, /16. Now, your network ID is typically what is known as your first address, and your broadcast ID is known as your last address. This is not always the case, but it is very common. And let me log back into this Kali machine here and I'll show you. So we have our IP address, 192.168.57.139. And we've got a net mask of 255.255.255.0. What does that tell you from what we just learned? That tells you we have a /24 network. Okay, this is a common network. There are potentially 254 hosts. Why do I keep saying that? Why do I keep subtracting 2? Well, we've got a network ID and a broadcast ID, or broadcast IP here. Well, what we need to know is we are .139. We could be anywhere from .1 to .254 within this network. That's our 254 possibilities. This 0 means we have the flexibility to be any IP address range from 1 to 254. Usually a .0 for this IP here and a .255 make up your network ID and your broadcast IP, okay, usually. So if we were to say something along the lines of, let's go back to this Excel document, and we were to say something along the lines of this. Let's say that we have a /24 network, and we want to know how many hosts. We want to know what our network ID is and what our broadcast ID is, or IP is, okay? We would say, okay, and we'll give it one more. We'll say it's a /24, and the IP starts with 192.168.1.0, okay? Or we can even write it like this, 192.168.1.0/24, delete this, and we'll say, what's our subnet mask? What's our host? What's our network? What's our broadcast? So subnet, you come to your cheat sheet, you say, okay, /24, I already know that I need to be filling in this area here on the X, so I'm just going to come in 255. What's the X? Well, we know to come down this row, 255 here, .0. Okay, and then we've got hosts. I'm just going to expand this a little bit. We've got the hosts. Okay, hosts are right here, 256 hosts. Potentially 254 though, because we always subtract 2 from the host total. So our network ID is usually the first address available to us, which is 192.168.1.0. The broadcast is 192.168.1.255, meaning available to us is anything from .1 to .254. Let's take a look at something else. That's a basic example. Let's do like a /28. Let's say we got 192.168.1.0/28. Now what? Well, we've got 16 hosts here. Okay, so our subnet is then going to fill in 255.255.255.x, right? Because we're in this row. /28 says it's going to be a 240 when we drop down to the subnet mask. I'm going to make this a little bigger. How many hosts? 16 minus 2. We have 14 hosts. Okay, so the first Non-host would be 192.168.1.0. Again, still the same thing. First address. Last address is going to be what? 192.168.1.15. Does that make sense? 0 to 15 is 16 addresses. Usable space is 14 because we take out the network and the broadcast. Now, you could see something like this, and then guess what? You're segmented. So because you're only using this little bit of space, you can then in turn have something like this, 192.168.1.16/28. And then it starts the same way. Your subnet mask is actually the same because you're using a /28. You come through, you can just copy and paste that. The hosts are still the same. What changes here? Well, your first address, 192.168.1.16. And then your last address, which is 192.168.1.31. So because this is smaller on the /28 side, we can actually have multiple networks within, like, say, a .1, .0, .1.16, .1.32. You get multiple little networks here with only a small amount of hosts. So maybe you have just a few servers in this range, and you have like servers A, B, and C. They go in a /28, and then you have another one of servers D, C, and E, or D, E, and F, however you want to say it. And you have more in that range. Okay, so you can subnet this out into different things. And when we see subnets, we see all kinds of stuff. We could see phones, servers, user computers, wireless, all different sort of things. Some companies get really specific with their subnetting. Now let's try one more. Let's say we have a /23. Now I want to put in 192.168.1.0/23, but that would be wrong. Why would this be wrong? This is actually going to be a 0, and I'll show you why in a second. So we're no longer locking in this number anymore, right? When we get below the /24, the 255 all the way across for 3 of them, guess what? We're now have the ability to change this number other than what's locked in. So let's do a .0. We'll talk about why. Let's hit enter here. So a subnet on a /23. Well, we're going to do a 254, which is going to be the placeholder of the X here. We're going to come in and say 255, 255, 254.0. And now again, we're not locked in. So remember, this 255 would lock in this .1. That doesn't happen anymore. So we've got 255, 255, 254.0. We're actually going to start at 0 here. And we're going to say the number of hosts that are possible, it's 510. Okay, 512 minus 2. We'll say our network ID is 192.168.0.0. And our broadcast would then be 192.168.1.255. Why? Okay, so we have the possibility now that we're spanning 2 ranges. We've got 510 hosts in this network. Okay, and we have the ability to go between 0 and 1. We've got 2 options now, 0 and 1. So if we were to say another network, if we wanted to get to like a 2, we'd actually have to say 192.168.2.0/23. It would be the same subnet mask, same number of hosts, but then this would be 192.168.2.0, 192.168.3.255. Again, there's 510 possible hosts in between this, right? Because you got to think, .0.1, .0.2, .0.3, all the way through 254. And again, 1.1, 1.2, all the way through 254. So that equals 510. Once you've hit that maximum, that 1.255, then guess what? You start at 2, you have a whole new network here. Just like these smaller segments, you get whole new networks on the bigger side as well. So what you need to know is that if I were to put something like a 192.168.1.0/23, that would have fallen into line with the 1 and the 0, and our actual network ID still would have been 0.0, and a 1.255 would have been the broadcast here. And you can double check this. Anytime you're confused, you can double check your CIDR notation. So I'm going to bring over a website that I will show you here. And this is just an IP addressing guide. It's called ipaddressguide.com. You bring this over and you scroll down just a little bit, and I just put in 192.168.1.0/23, and you can see that it actually corrects me and says the first bit is 192.168.0.0, the last one's 192.168.1.255. Total host is 512 minus 2. Shows you that, again, first IP, last IP, you got your net mask. Very easy to use a CIDR calculator here or an IP range to convert to CIDR as well. So very useful calculators, but if you're not allowed to use these for like an exam purpose or something along those lines, then using the cheat sheet that I've shown you is super useful. Now, what I want to do is I want to try 3 more subnets. Okay, I'm going to write these out. I'm going to say 192.168.0.0/22, 192.168.1.0/26, and 192.168.1.0/27. I want you to solve these for me. Tell me the subnet mask, the host, network, and broadcast. And with that being said, this again is a very complicated topic. I did not pick this up the first time or the second time that I got it. If you're running confused right now, perfectly normal. You can go back and watch this video again, try to pick up more topics, try to understand it. Maybe I'm not the right instructor for this either. I do recommend looking at other resources to completely fill in your knowledge gap if there is one that exists. Another resource that I'll link down is what is called 7-second subnetting. It is very useful. A lot of students have recommended it to me. I'm going to push it forward as well. So go ahead and try to solve this. Understand that what you're after here is just understanding what a subnet is. Okay, when you see something like this, if a client sends you 192.168.1.0/24, you're going to say, hey, okay, I know that there's probably 254 hosts in that network, and I know what I'm working with. If you see this 255.255.255.0, again, you know that you're working with a /24 network. Very standard stuff. That's what we're after. I don't expect you to ever memorize this. I don't have this memorized. Like, I don't come in here and say, you know, a /18 is a 255.255.192.0 network, and it's got 16,384 hosts. I don't do that. Okay, I have a cheat sheet. I'll use a website if I need to. For the most part, what you need to understand is 254 hosts for a /24. If that number has gone up to like a /28, you know you're dealing with less. If that number is lower, like a /16, you know you're dealing with a bigger network. That's really what it comes down to, unless you are working in networking, and then these become more important. But as a pen tester, understanding how to read this, understanding what the subnet is, and just identifying it with very basic measures, this is extremely useful. So I will catch you over in the next video when we talk about solving these challenges, and hopefully we got them all right. So I'll see you over there in the next one.
All right, so in order to be successful in this course, we are going to be utilizing what is called a virtual machine. Now, virtual machines are known as VMs for short, and a VM is just a machine on top of a machine. And to give you an example, I'm actually running this Windows 10 instance that you see here on top of my Windows 10 instance. So here you can see, if I scroll up, that I have a Windows 10 machine. I also have a Linux machine sitting here. If I were to demaximize this, you can see that I'm actually running here a Windows machine in the back. This is my wife and I, and you come through here, we just blow it back up, and we're back inside of our machine. So a virtual machine is just a machine inside of a machine. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be utilizing this to build out labs. That way we don't have to actually have a bunch of hardware. We can just use this for our course and run what we need to on top of our own machine already. Now, this can get resource intensive. So if you are only utilizing something like 8 gigabytes of RAM, then you might have some issues with this, but you can still follow along. When we get into the Active Directory portion, you might run into issues if you do not have at least 16 gigabytes of RAM to utilize. But we'll worry about that when we get there. There's still plenty of ways to follow along throughout this whole course. So another thing to note is that I use VMs every single day. This machine that you see here is actually my day-to-day pen testing machine. So I run a Kali Linux instance on top of my Windows machine and utilize that to do penetration testing. So I'm going to demonstrate that to you and how we're going to build out our labs with that. And a lot of us in the industry run through VMs as opposed to running it directly on Metal or on a machine.
So in order to utilize virtual machines, we first need some sort of virtual machine software to play these. So there are two different ways that we can do this. If you are on a Windows machine or a Linux machine, you can utilize VMware Workstation Player. Now, if you type in VMware Workstation Player in Google, the first one here that says download VMware Workstation Player, you just click on that. And if you are in a Mac environment, you're going to be utilizing Oracle VirtualBox. So if you type in Oracle VirtualBox, you come here and you go to Downloads. You have your option there as well. So in this course, I will be using VMware Workstation Player. I'm going to be running it on top of Windows. If you are using Mac, that is absolutely fine. You're going to be following along just the same. All you need to be able to do is follow the same instructions that I give you and you will be A-OK. So if you scroll down here, you can see try Workstation Player for Windows or try Workstation Player for Linux. Go ahead and just select download now. That should bring up a download and go ahead and save it. If you're doing VirtualBox, go ahead and download for OS X. I will download the Windows version just so that we can see what that looks like as well. So I'll save both of these. So let's view our downloads, and we've got VMware Workstation Player here. I'm going to go ahead and open this one, and we're going to install this. And this will be very point and click. So next, accept the agreement, possibly give away our first child. Yeah, we should go ahead and install the enhanced keyboard driver while we have this. And then we don't need to join any improvement programs or check for product update. That's okay. We will install desktop, start menu. You check your preferences as you like it. I'm just going to install this, and this should just finish here in just a second. Okay, then you'll be brought to this screen once everything's done. It should take about a minute or two, and we're going to go ahead and hit finish. And it's going to want a restart to take effect. You can go ahead and restart your system. I'm going to say no right now. Let's go ahead and install VirtualBox if you are a Mac user. We'll hit next. Next here. Next, and yes, and install. Accept. And again, very point and click with the installation. Select install and any options that do pop up. And then we can start Oracle VM if we want. Let's go ahead and just start that. This is what Oracle VM looks like. And let's see if we can start the VMware player here, even though we need a restart. And this is what VMware Workstation Player looks like. So here you can see that we have virtual machines. We can create new virtual machines, open ones, etc. We'll get into that in the next video. So again, if you are using Windows or Linux, this is probably what your view is going to look like for the rest of the time. If you are using Oracle on a Mac, this is what your view is going to look like. Another side pro tip here is that I am using Workstation Pro, and I might utilize this in some instances throughout the course. Other instances, I'll be utilizing the Workstation Player. They are not much of a difference, especially in the beginning. When we get into the Active Directory portion, it might actually be worth it for you all to download the VMware Pro trial, because the trial is 30 days, and you can utilize that to get through some sections and actually have nice little windows here to be clean and just have a pro edition. You can do everything that I'm going to show you in the course on the player. It just is that you have to open, if you want to run more than one machine, you'll just have to reopen the VMware Workstation Player several times to run multiple machines, but that's okay. It just won't look like this nice clean layout where you can transfer between machines like I can do just here. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on to the next video. We're going to be installing Kali Linux onto our VMware Workstation Player. All right, so now that we have our VMware Player installed, we're going to need to put a VM on top of that. So throughout this course, we're going to be utilizing Linux. More specifically, we're going to be utilizing a Linux called Kali Linux. Now, if you've never used Linux before, that's absolutely okay. We have a section coming up on introductory Linux, and we'll get you completely up to speed. But for now, we need to be able to install Linux so that we can use it. And Kali Linux is a Debian-based version of Linux. and it is a pen tester Linux. So this is completely built for ethical hacking, as you're going to see once we dive into it. So I've gone ahead and just went to Google and typed in Kali Linux download. And if we scroll down, we're going to skip this first section here. Let's scroll down to this Kali Linux custom image downloads from Offensive Security. We're going to click on this link and we're going to scroll down a bit. And you can see that there are Kali Linux VMware images. Now, if you're utilizing VMware, this is exactly what you're going to use here. And if you're using VirtualBox, then you're going to use this down here. Since we are using VMware, I'm going to go ahead and select the 64-bit download here. So we're going to download 64-bit. You can either download it just by clicking, or you can download the torrent as well. So this is going to download a 7-zip file. I'm going to go ahead and just hit download and save. And this is going to take a second. This is 2.2 gigs. So go ahead and pause the video. Once your download is complete, we'll go ahead and start from there. Okay, so the download has finished and I'm going to go ahead and select open. Now, if you do not have a 7-zip installed on your machine, you're going to need to install 7-zip. So you can go out to Google and just say 7-zip download. And if you go to download 7-zip right here, download the appropriate one for you. Here is the executable 64-bit for Windows. So go ahead and download this one, install it, again, point and click, and you'll have 7-zip on your machine. So once you have that, come back here and we're going to need to extract this. So go ahead and get your file extracted. I'm going to do that really quick. And I'm dragging this over just to show you. It's going to take some time. I'm just putting it in my downloads folder. So again, we're just dealing with a lot of data. Compressed, I think it's 2.2 gigs. Uncompressed, around 9 or 10 gigs. So make sure you have the space as well when you do extract this. So once this is done extracting your machine, go ahead and unpause the video and come back, and then we'll actually get Kali Linux up and running. Okay, so now I've got my VMware Workstation Player open. Our files are extracted. I'm going to go ahead and just select Open a Virtual Machine. And I've navigated to the folder that I needed to get to, which is just my Downloads folder with this Kali 2019.3. I'm going to go ahead and open that. And now you should see that the file's open. Before we go ahead and do this, let's go ahead and just select Edit Virtual Machine Settings. And there's a couple things that we need to talk about in here. So the amount of memory that you allocate depends on the amount of memory that you have. So here it tells you the recommended amount and the amount that you have maximum available. So for my system, for example, I have 32 gigabytes of RAM. Now, I would probably give this machine somewhere between 4 and maybe 8 gigabytes. I would say 4 gigabytes. If you do not have a lot of RAM, go ahead and leave it at 2 gigabytes. 2 gigabytes is fine. You might notice a tiny bit of slowness, but it's nothing that's going to keep you behind by any means. So I'm going to bump this one up to 4096, which is 4 gigabytes. And I'm also going to take a look at the network adapter. Now, we haven't gotten into networking yet, but we're going to cover some of these topics. So NAT is a protocol that we can use, or we can use Bridge. Go ahead and leave it for now at NAT. If we need to change it to Bridge later, we will. NAT should be perfectly fine. If you don't know what NAT is, that's okay. We're going to cover that here in a little bit. So we'll select OK, and we're just going to hit power on. And when you get this prompt, all you have to say is, I copied it, and it's going to boot up your Kali Linux machine. Now, this is the first time booting it. Sometimes you can full screen it, sometimes you can't. As of right now, we just tried to full screen. It doesn't work yet. So go ahead and let this boot up. It shouldn't take but just a second.
Okay, and now we're going to be brought to this login screen here. And the password is going to be, well, the user is going to be Kali. Password is going to be Kali. And you just log in. Might take a second to log in on the first go. Now, you'll be brought to this screen. Now, what you may or may have not noticed is that this is a perhaps different version of Kali that you're running. Things do change as the videos go on, what you're hearing on this video is actually an update from where we were at. As you saw me installing, I was installing 2019.3. As we are working through the course, I'm actually going ahead and doing updates. So this is now 2020.4, and we are adding updates to the course. So the notes that I have for you before we move into the Linux section is, if you're installing Kali and it looks a little bit different, that's okay. These versions do change over time. Sometimes they do get major updates. When that happens, I update the course. Here we are on the latest and greatest as of right now, so this is kind of what it looks like, but don't be too worried if your image or your background or things look a little bit different. Everything that you're going to learn is 95% the same for the most part. So let's go ahead and move forward. We're going to go and move to the next section where we start talking about Kali Linux, and we start talking about an overview of what Kali Linux is and how to navigate around it, and we'll talk about Linux and Linux commands as well. So I look forward to seeing you in the next section. Okay, so this video pertains to some updates we need to make to VirtualBox for quality of life. So if you're not using VirtualBox, you can go ahead and skip this video. If you are, buckle in. We just need to do a couple of quick updates, and then we should be good for the rest of the course. So go ahead and go out to Google and Google VirtualBox extension pack. What it's going to bring up is just the downloads page of VirtualBox. So we're going to want to go here. And on this page, if you look kind of towards the middle, you'll see that there is a VirtualBox extension pack here. We're going to just click all supported platforms, and that will automatically download the file that we need. So once that is downloaded, and pause if you need to, go ahead and open VirtualBox. And you can come in here, and up at the top, we're going to go ahead and click on Preferences. And from here, we are interested in extensions. See extensions right here. Go ahead and click on that. There's a little plus sign. We're going to go ahead and click on that. And then you should have your downloads right here. So we're going to take the downloads and just go ahead and install that. Hit install. Read this. Give away your firstborn. Accept all the terms. And you should be good. Very quick install. Okay. The second thing we need to do is we need to come to the one tab up here above, which is Network. We're going to go ahead and hit the Network button, or this Add button, and we're going to add what is called a NAT network. Okay, and we're going to come in here and we're going to double click. And you can go ahead and keep these defaults. I'm going to actually change them to 192.168.57.0 because that's what's going to be used through the rest of the course. And that is what the CIDR notation of my Kali machine and my Keyoptrix, which you'll see later, etc., all fell into this 57.0. So we're going to go ahead and keep it on this NAT network. Make sure you support DHCP. Go ahead and just hit OK. Hit OK. And then for a machine, and make sure any machine that you use, again, any machine that you use in this course, make sure you set it to NAT network if you're using VirtualBox. So you can come in here, click on a machine like this mail machine I have here. You can just click on that, settings, go to network, and then you can go ahead and just go to NAT network. All right. And that name right here, you see name NAT network. That's all we're going to use. That'll automatically set it up. So when you have a Kali machine running later and you have Keyoptrix or another box running, or even when we build out an Active Directory lab, you need to make sure that you're running that NAT network so that all of the machines are on the same subnet. If you don't, you might run into a situation where the same IP comes up for the same machine and then they're conflicting with each other, or you get on different networks and some weird stuff happens. So make sure, again, that it's imperative that you're setting that NAT network for every single machine that you're setting up. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next video in this section. The first thing I'd like to do before we get started with any commands or anything like that is just take a look around Kali Linux and kind of demonstrate why a pen tester or ethical hacker might use this distribution of Linux. Now, throughout the course, as stated in the last video, you might see a different version of this pop up as I recorded videos on some of the older versions. Everything should still work just as is. You just might see a different look and feel to some of the Kali interface.
but all the commands I'm going to show you, everything that we do is going to be the same. So let's take a look and just explore Kali Linux just for a bit. So if we come up here into the corner and we just click on the little Kali logo, you could see that we have nice things broken out for us. So we've got these favorites up here, which we have our terminal, which we're going to be living in essentially. We've got a text editor, we've got a web browser, which is basically Firefox. We've got some other tools down here, docs, etc. The other thing that we can come scroll through is we can see that we have different applications in here. If we look at the different sections, these kind of go in order, which we haven't covered quite yet, but in the order of how a hack might go down. So information gathering is usually the first step. You can come in here, look through this, and here's a bunch of tools related to information gathering. You can even click into these and go deeper if you wanted to, related to specific things. So DNS or SMB or open source intelligence. All of this that's in here, this is just built-in tools. So let's say we're coming in here and we want to do a wireless attack. Well, we go to wireless attacks. We've got a bunch of tools already built in. So Kali Linux is just essentially a ethical hacking distribution of Linux, and it's built on Debian. So if you've ever used something like Ubuntu or anything along those lines of a Debian distribution, this is all going to feel really familiar to you with just a bunch of tools built in on top of it. So fairly straightforward. They do have some nice tools in here. You can come through and utilize these. A lot of this is already built in, and we're going to take a look at that as we go. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is, and throughout the rest of this course, is start looking at the terminal. So if you come up here, you'll see that we have a terminal. Now, mostly everything that we do is going to be done in this terminal here. Now, this is almost like accessing the command line. So if you're using a command line like in Windows, for example, if you've ever used a command line, if not, that's okay. But we do a lot of this from this interface as opposed to maybe utilizing a GUI-based interface where if we clicked a folder, this might look more familiar to you if you're a Windows or Mac user. You come in here, you have this kind of area. Yeah, we can do that, and sometimes we'll utilize this, but a lot of times we're going to be living right here. Okay, so as we move forward, we're going to start talking about this command line, how we can utilize it and use it to our advantage, and then we'll do some tips and tricks and hopefully learn some pretty neat stuff as we go. So in the next video, I'm going to cover the sudo feature, which I think is important. It's something that was brought in. Now, originally we had something called a root permission, and we'll talk about that. That has changed since 2020.1 moving forward. So we're introducing that into this course, and we'll talk options that you have. So let's go ahead and move to the next video where we talk about the sudo feature. All right, so before we look at any commands or learn any command line, we have to talk about sudo. Sudo is very important, and what had happened previously was that in the earlier versions of Kali Linux, we ran as a user called root. Root is the ultimate user. You could think of it as the administrator of the machine. Now we're running as a user called Kali, so we don't have root privileges directly. This is as an improved security feature because we should be running only certain commands when we need to as the root user. So what we're going to see is we're going to see how we can run commands as an elevated privilege, and we're going to do that with sudo, which stands for super user do. They just kind of shortened it, so we just have sudo now, okay? Now with sudo, what we're doing is we're saying, hey, I want to run a command elevated. I want to run this as a higher user. In this instance, we can say, I want to run the command as root. Why is that important? Well, let's take a look at an example. Let's say that I wanted to look at a very sensitive file. Now, one sensitive file in our system is the etc shadow file. You can see cat etc like this, etc shadow. And you don't have to follow along right now. You don't have to really understand what's going on if you've never seen Linux. All I'm doing is saying, hey, I want to print out this file. I want to look at it, okay? And for here, I can't see it. It says permission denied. You don't have the access to see this file. That's a good thing. But if I was the root user or somebody that had elevated privileges, I could see it. So I could say sudo cat etc shadow like this. Okay, and it's going to say, what is your password for Kali? I'm going to go ahead and say Kali, K-A-L-I. Hit enter. And now I can see that I have access to this file. And this file is very sensitive. We'll talk about this later on in the course, but sensitive file, okay? So when we're looking at it, I ran that command specifically as the root user. As the root user, I'm able to see, okay, this file now. Why, or what's going on here? Well, we're running that specific command, right? And we're still staying as Kali. We're doing this in a kind of one-off scenario. So there will be times where something that you run in this course might require sudo, or you can run the command without sudo, but you notice something doesn't work. So best practice for this is saying, hey, let's go ahead and just run mostly everything that I'm showing you command-wise in this course. That's not best practice overall. Usually you should run things just as a regular user. If you get permissions blocked, then run it as sudo as necessary. Now, the other thing to point out, and we'll talk about this again later on in the course, but why can we do this is because this user is part of what's called a sudoers file, meaning we can have this permission. Not any user can come in here. Say we made a new user and we just called the user John. We can't just take John and just go ahead and just run these commands as root. No, John has to have the permission to do this. So you can think of Kali as being an administrator, but only when we utilize that access or that privilege. Okay, the other thing I want to show you though is that we can switch over to root if we want to. We can come in here and we can say sudo switch user dash, just like that. And then I'll put us into root. Now you can see, okay, we're running root at Kali, and that's only for this instance. You can, if you want, I'm not going to demonstrate how to do this, but you can, if you want, change the root password, log out, and log back in as root, and run through this course as root. Again, that's not best security practice, but that feature is available to you if you are a Linux user that is comfortable with Linux, comfortable with running as root, and you want the easy path. Otherwise, I highly recommend just staying as Kali, running as sudo privileges as you need it, and then moving forward. But this is a quick way to switch into root if you need to. Sometimes even running sudo causes some issues, so switching to root to run a command is okay. What we can do here too is a demonstration is we can go file new tab and look at a new instance, and you'll see that this instance of root is only good for this tab here. Once we start a new tab, we're going to be brought back right back to Kali. You can see that from the top line in the tab as well. So just keep note of this when you're running commands in this course. If you see something, again, try running it with sudo if it's not working, or if it says access denied, then you know, hey, I need to run sudo. Very, very, very important. Okay, I'm trying to drive that into your brains right now. So from here, we're going to move on. We're going to start looking at how to navigate around the file system, taking a look at everything from a bigger picture and diving into terminal. So I will see you over in the next video. Okay, so now our first lesson in Linux terminology is going to be navigating the file system. So if you're a Windows user, you're used to navigating your file system probably through folders, through a GUI, so a graphical user interface. Well, in Linux, we can do that, but the majority of the time we're going to live in this terminal here. So we really need to know how to get around. So the first thing we can do here is we can say, hey, where are we at? And that's PWD. So that stands for present working directory. So you type that in, you hit enter, and it says, okay, we're in the root folder. So we know that we're in the root folder, but how do we get out of the root folder? We can use a command called cd, and that stands for change directory. So if we want to change directory backwards, we just type in 2 dots here. And now we can say, okay, where are we at? So we're in a slash. So we're just in a home folder here, or just our generic slash folder, right? So what we can do is, well, how do we know, can we go backwards from here? Let's keep trying. So we do pwd again. No, we can't. This is our base folder, right? So you have to think of this as the lowest you can go. So now how do we move around? How do we know how to go forwards again? Well, we don't know what's in our directories, right? So we're sitting in this slash folder, and how do we look around? So there's a command called ls that lists everything that's in the folder. So if we say ls, we kind of see this color coordinated here. And the color coordination, it just depends on if it's a folder, if the folder's read-write, there's permission settings, which we're going to get into later. But the majority of these here are folders. Okay, well, we know we just came out of root, so we can go back into root. Now, how do we do that? So we can say change directory root, and we can actually hit tab to autocomplete. I don't know if you caught that, but there's no R any folder besides root. So at R, I can just hit tab, and it should type it out for me. Oh, I lied. There is a run in here somewhere, but it's hidden. We're going to cover that soon as well. So RO, hit tab, autocomplete, can change directory into root. So let's ls in root and see what's in here. Okay, this is more like our home folder, right? So we've got desktop, documents, downloads. This is kind of what applies to the root user. So what if we're sitting in this root folder here and we wanted to access instead this etc folder? Well, could we do the same etc command here? Well, I'm hitting tab and nothing's happening. Well, because etc doesn't belong in this area, right? But if we put a / in front of it, because this is the base, and then we hit etc there, now we can navigate to the etc folder. And we can actually double tab and see what's all in the etc folder, like an ls, say no. Another way to do that is if we wanted to ls what's in the etc folder without navigating to it, we could just type ls etc, and you can see everything that's in here. So there's some tricks that we can do, right? So we don't have to actually navigate to the folder to know what's in there. Again, if we ls and we want to know what's sitting in videos, or even let's say what's sitting in desktop for our folder. Well, if we start typing desktop and hit tab, we can't do that either, because everything in Linux is case sensitive. So if we start typing desktop and then hit tab now, we can ls and see what's in there. So our VMware came with a couple of shell scripts here that are automatically placed on our desktop. If we wanted to confirm that, you can see that they're both right here. So as of right now, we are just sitting in our root home folder, and we know how to navigate around. So if we wanted to go to desktop, we could hit ls now and see what's in there. If we wanted to go backwards, we could. Okay, now we're back in our root folder, and you can also tell where you're at. Your present working directory sits right here, right? So this little tilde is actually your home folder, and you can see that we're in desktop. So if we wanted to go back into our desktop, instead of typing, say you wanted to go to music from your desktop, instead of going root music, which will work, you could also just say, I want to go music, and that'll put you there as well. And notice you don't need the leading / when you use the tilde. So just some couple interesting tricks that you'll kind of pick up along the way. Tab is definitely going to be your best friend. If you run into something with multiple options, say you're trying to CD and you say, I want to go to my desktop, and you're tabbing and it's not working, you can hit double tab, and then it'll show you, okay, well, there's desktop, documents, downloads. Those are your 3 options that start with a D. So now you kind of have an idea as to how to kind of move around, but let's do a little bit more. So what if we want to make our own folder? Well, there's something called make directory, mkdir. So if we say make directory, we'll say, I'm just going to use my name, Heath. So now if we ls, we can see that this Heath folder is now here. We can go into the Heath folder, and there should be nothing in it, right? So we can go back, and we can also get rid of the Heath folder, remove directory Heath. If we ls again, it's gone. So now, what else can we do? Well, we can also look for hidden folders. So we can say ls-la, and we can look for hidden files and folders here. Remember the color coordination. So this .cache, right? That in theory is a hidden folder. So if we say cd.cache, we can go into there. We ls, and there's actually some information in there. But when you saw it originally, you didn't see that. We're going to cover more on this. I just kind of wanted to show you that trick. As you see over on the left side, there's file permissions and properties. So be aware that just because it looks like something's not there doesn't mean it's not there. It might just actually be hidden, similar to Windows where you have hidden files and folders. So just a quick trick to show you that. So another thing we can do. So let's go back. And don't worry about what I'm doing here. You're going to cover these commands in a little bit. I'm just going to echo hi, and we're going to put that in a test.txt folder. So now if we ls, you can see that test.txt is here. So if we want to actually copy this file, we can copy this file to another location. So we can say, hey, I've got this test.txt, but I actually want to move it to downloads. And if we go ls to downloads, you could see that test.txt is actually sitting in there. And if we wanted to remove it, we can just say remove from downloads, or test.txt. Actually, sorry, remove downloads test.txt. We don't even have to transition into that directory if we don't want to. So another trick, say we want to see now that it's gone, and we want to ls, but we don't want to keep typing this out. If you hit the up arrow, now you can just see your old commands. So if you keep typing a command over and over, you can see what's going on. So ls shows that there's nothing in downloads now. We were able to successfully remove that file. So another thing that we can do is we can actually move. So say we wanted to move test.txt, and we wanted to put that into downloads. Okay, now if we ls, test.txt is now gone from this folder because we've moved it. We haven't made a copy, we've actually physically moved it away. So now if we ls, actually let's just tab up, you can see that test.txt is now in there. And I'm going to remove that here. Okay, and now the last thing I want to show you is the locate feature. So if we wanted to locate a file, say I wanted to locate bash, let's see. So we're looking for a file, and we're going to get more specific along the way, but if you type in locate, you can kind of look through a system to see if you can find it. Now I'm looking for, say, any type of bin bash or bin-r bash. That's fine, that's really what I wanted, but it shows you everything with bash in it. Now this might not work right away. What you might need to do is update the database. So you type in update db, it updates everything for you, and then you can use locate again. So it has to build that database of the information that it's finding in order to locate what you're searching for. So make sure that you use update db sort of frequently. Okay, so two more things I want to show you, and then we'll close out this video and move on to the next one. So an important thing you want to do with your new account is we're using a default password, and that's not very secure. So to change a password for our user, we can just type in passwd, and now it's going to ask us for a new password. So instead of using Tor, we can use something else. I'm going to type in the very secure password as my password for an example here. But if you plan on using this machine for future reference, you can type in a secure password and kind of keep it. So lastly, I wanted to show you is something called man. So man pages. Man pages are your instructions for any command that you're running. Most commands come with a man page. So let's say we want to look at ls. We can say man ls. And then it's going to give us all this information here about ls. So if you see, it says ls is list directory contents. Awesome. And then it gives you what options we can do. Well, we can do a -a for all, which you saw earlier. And you can kind of scroll through here and just see exactly what it has to offer. And that's kind of it. So when you go through here, you can kind of, if you're struggling to, there's a command in there, but you're not sure exactly what the command is, you can type in man and search it, And sometimes you can do ls, I don't know if this is going to work, but -- help, and you get some information as well. It doesn't provide you the full man pages, but it provides you something pretty close. So that's kind of just your way around if you ever get stuck, something to look for. Okay, so that's it for this lesson. Next, we're going to move on to users and privileges, how to add users, and how to change some sudos and some modifications to our file permissions. Okay, so now we're going to cover users and privileges. So in the last video, we touched a little bit on privileges with our ls-la, and we touched a little bit on users by changing the password of our root account. So now we'll cover a few more commands regarding those. So if we look again at ls-la, you could see all this crazy jumbled wordage over here, right? So it actually means something. So we look at the first line here. If we see a dash like this, a hyphen, that means it's a file. If we see a D, that means it's actually a directory. And then you see R, W, and X. So R, W, and X actually means read, write, execute. It's the permission settings that this particular group has. Now there are 3 groups here. There's the first, second, and then your third right here, right? So your first group right here is the owner of the file. So it looks like the owner of the file has full read-write execution, right? And then the next set of 3 here is actually the permissions for the members of the group that own the file. So this is group ownership as opposed to actual ownership here. So for the people that are in the group that has access to this file, they can only read and execute. They can't write to it. Now, for the last one, this is just all of their users. So any common user here can actually just read and execute. They can't write the document. So that comes into play, especially when we get into penetration testing, because with penetration testing, we're looking to have full access, right? So we're always going to be looking for that folder that has full read-write. Typically, if we look at temp, that's our temp folder a lot of times. You see the temp folder has full read-write execute. So when we're doing penetration testing, we're trying to upload some sort of exploit, we might actually upload it into the temp folder because that's where we can execute those files. However, we could also be looking for other full read-write execute files where we need to modify them and give us root access to a system. So it's all about insecure configurations, and we're going to cover that more once we get into the actual penetration testing part of the course. So for the Linux Essentials part of the course, all we need to worry about is these file permissions. Another important feature of that is if we were to create a script, our script's not going to be able to run until it has full access. So how do we change access here? So let's make a file. I'm just going to make, we'll just echo another text document, right? So we'll just say hello. And actually I typed that in backwards. So hello, and we'll call it hello.text. So if we ls here, by default, we only have read-write and then read access for everybody else. Meaning if we wanted to read it, we could say cat, which we're going to get into later, cat hello.text. It just says hello. So what can we do here? Well, we can use something called change mode. In changing mode is chmod, and we have a couple options here. So we can do a plus, right? And we could say, well, we want read, write, execute, or we just want execute. But another way I like doing it is you have a number feature. So the one you really need to know is all sevens. Sevens gives you full read-write access across the board. So if we say chmod 777 hello.text, now we ls la. And you notice that hello.text turns green. That means it is full read-write. And here you go. We've got the dash here saying it's a file, and we've got read, write, execute across the board. So this is how we change file permissions. You don't need to necessarily know about the other numbers in terms of penetration testing. It becomes more in terms of configuration and security management of files if you were to get down that path. So to stay on the easiest path, just remember 777 or +X will work as well. So changing the mode is critical, and we're going to cover it time and time again throughout the course once we get a little bit deeper. So a couple more things we need to talk about. Say we wanted to add a new user. Well, there's a feature called add user. So we say add user, and 1 or 2 names is allowed. So we need to add user, say John. Okay, so it made something for John. Let's give him a password. Give him a password again, and we'll just hit enter for the defaults. It's all correct. Okay, so we now have a user named John. And we can confirm that. We can actually cat the etc password file here. And you see down at the very bottom, we have this user John. So this etc password file, you're going to become very familiar with because it shows you all the users. Now there's a lot of times where you're doing penetration testing, you're going to have access to this etc password file because it doesn't provide the password anymore. It used to a long time ago. Passwords are now in the shadow file, so you actually have a little bit of access and information disclosure here at the hands of poor configuration. So you see that I've created a user John. Well, that gives us a little bit of information. Say there's SSH on a machine or something else, we can use that username of John to try to break into the machine. So we'll cover that again later. But if we wanted to see what the etc shadow file looks like, now we come in here and you've got these jumbled stuff here, right? So it's just a hashing format. So what we're doing is we can actually use a tool like Hashcat to break this down and crack these passwords. Now, a password will be very easy. But just know that if you have access to the etc shadow file, you have a good chance of cracking a password, depending on your capabilities and depending on the strength of the password, that'll allow you access to a machine. So something to think about there. Okay, so now we have our user John. Let's go ahead and switch to him. So we can use something called SU, which stands for switch user, and we'll say switch user John. Okay, so it automatically gave us John here. Let's see if we could switch back to root. Okay, we can't just switch back to root because we need root's password, right? So we can type in password and that works. But if we didn't know the password, then we'd be stuck on John. We were able to access John because we were already root. So this comes into play in terms of users. Let's go back to John here. Now, if you're a user, you have to be able to do certain things. You need permission to do certain things, I should say, right? So root has full access and permission to do everything. But John, we just created John. John doesn't have any sort of access. So if we wanted to change the password, say we want to change the password for root, I can't modify the password information because I don't have that kind of access. Now there is something called a sudo, which would provide John that access if we gave it to him. So it's called a sudoers file, and basically anybody in that sudoers file can change permissions given if they are a sudo user, right? So we would type in sudo password root, and it's going to ask for the password for John, but you're going to notice, hey, John's not in the sudoers file. John can't do this. So John has base permissions, right? And we're going to counter that a lot of times in penetration testing, where if we get in, we'll get something called lower privilege, and we'll get an account like John, and we're going to try to escalate into root, but we just can't do it. You know, the chances of doing that and having a John in a sudoers file is just not high. It's possible, but it's not likely. So for now, just know that if you want a user other than root to have access to file permissions, you need to have them in the sudoers file. That becomes useful too in penetration testing because you can look at the sudoers file if you have access to see what users have sudo privileges. Okay, so that is it for this lesson. In the next lesson, we're going to be covering network commands and moving on gradually towards scripting. So let's go ahead and get there, and I will see you when we get over there.
Okay, so now let's cover network commands. So the first command I want to cover is ifconfig. So you may be familiar with the Windows version of this, which is ipconfig, and they pretty much do the same thing. So it shows you here your different interface types and the IP address associated with them. So ETH0 here, Ethernet 0, has an IP address of 192.168.132.164. You can see the net mask, the broadcast address, and you can see the MAC address as well. And we also have a loopback address here. Now, if your machine has a wireless adapter, or at some point you want to do wireless penetration testing, you're going to need iwconfig. And you should not expect to see anything on this at the moment unless you're using a laptop. Then you actually might see a configuration down here for it. If you would see something under iwconfig, you would see like a WLAN 1, WLAN 0, something along those lines. Okay, and another common command that we're going to see is going to be the ping command. So we can just type in ping and the address that we're trying to talk to. So for example, I'm going to try to ping my home router, and I get talking back. So if I tried to ping something that wasn't in my network, like a 16.1, you're going to see the results change. So with ping here, ping is going to be endless. Until we hit something like Control-C to stop it, it'll ping forever. So I'm going to hit Control-C again and kind of show you the difference. So you see that we attempted to ping here, and we got replies, we got information back. Well, that's good. That means we're talking to the other machine. It says, hey, are you there? It says, yeah, I'm there. And we try to ping this machine here, but this machine's not talking back. It could mean that the machine is not on the network, or that the machine is just blocking ICMP traffic. ICMP is another word for ping. So moving on to the next command, I want to show you ARP. So the best way I like to type in is ARP with a switch of A. And ARP is just going to show you MAC addresses that it talks to and the IP address. Actually, I said that backwards. It's going to show you the IP address it talks to and the MAC address associated with it. So if an IP address reaches out, say 192.168.15.1 talked out to this machine, it's going to say, okay, hey, who are you? It's going to send a broadcast message out. It's going to say, who has this IP address? And then the IP address will respond and says, hey, I do, and this is my MAC address. So ARP is just a way of associating IP addresses with MAC addresses. And once you know that, you can also look at netstat. So netstat-ano is another one of my favorite commands. And this shows you just the active connections that are running on your machine. So if we scroll way up, and you can just kind of see what's open and what's talking here. Where this really comes in handy on a penetration test is to see if a machine is talking to somebody else. Same thing with ARP. You want to know what that machine is associated with, and is it talking to something on a port. So this is more just internal right now, but it's still good to know. So for example, if I were to open up a Firefox page and connect out to the internet, then I went and I did a netstat again, I would see information about that port being open and that I am going out with it. So just kind of keep that in mind. These are not commands that you really need to know in depth right now. Networking does come into play when you are doing penetration testing, but we're going to cover these commands time and time and again. I just wanted to give you a very brief introduction to them. Okay, and the last command that I have for you today is route. So if you type in route, that's going to print your routing table. And the routing table is important because it tells you where your traffic exits, essentially. So for this VM, my traffic is exiting on 192.168.134.0. So any traffic goes out of this 0.0.0.0 gateway in this range, right? So when it goes out this gateway, it's doing NAT, so network address translation, and it's running off my computer. So the best examples aren't here, but it's important to know route as well, because there could be a machine that you're attacking that has multiple routes. So you might see a 134 and a 135 because it has a dual home NIC, meaning it has two NICs inside of it. So it's actually talking to a completely different network that you didn't know existed. So you might have been attacking one network in the 134 range, and then 135 is just out there, and this computer can talk to both. And until that point, you had no idea. And that's the idea of called pivoting, when you switch a network from one to the other, but you're using a machine. So that's it for this lesson. In the next lesson, we're going to talk about viewing, creating, and editing files.
So in the last video, we took a look at different networking commands. In this video, I want to show you some updates to those commands. Now, we were running IP or ifconfig, so we were doing ifconfig, and that works, and that's fine, although it is becoming deprecated. So it is still my go-to, if I'm being honest with you, because I like to stay old school, but I do need to show you the new and improved version of ifconfig. So if we take a look, I'm just going to clear my screen here. So the command is IP. Now we can say IPA, and we can look at that, and that says IP address. And what do we get here? Well, we get our loopback, and we get our Ethernet, and we still get to see what our IP address is. We get to see what our subnet mask is here as well. We get to see our broadcast address. So there's a lot of information here that is provided, which is good. We can also take a look at some of the stuff that I was showing you before. So say we want to look at the ARP table, we can say IPN, which stands for neighbor. Let me clear this. And here's our ARP table. Okay, so very similar. And we want to look at routing tables, we can just do IPR. So instead of having to remember, okay, ARP, or we're having to look at route, okay, we can do all of this through one command, which is the IP command. So I just wanted to add this updated video to kind of show you that there is this command out there. This is where the industry is moving. This is something that you should know, but it is perfectly fine in my book if you still want to use ifconfig. Nothing wrong with ifconfig, nothing wrong with using IPA. Both are fine. Okay, so just another command for your repertoire and for your tool belt, and something to keep in your back pocket. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next video.
All right, so second to last video here in our Linux series, and this one is a very important one. So we're going to cover a few things. I want to cover how to install files, how to install updates, and how to get files from GitHub. All these are going to be very important and things that you're going to encounter as a pen tester all the time. So from a Linux perspective, let's say that you want to update your system and you're in the terminal. Well, what you can do is you can say something along the lines of apt update, and we'll say also apt upgrade when you're done with that. So what this is going to do is this is going to go out, and you can see these archive.linux, and I'll scroll back up here. And all these tools need to be installed, but this archive.linux.edu, so this is what's called a repository. So we're going out to these repositories and we're saying, hey, what's been updated lately and what do we need to download? And you can see, okay, these packages that are automatically installed no longer required. We can auto remove them if we need to. And then we have all these new packages that need to be installed. If you look through the list, it's quite a bit. And then we've got the packages that'll also be upgraded through here as well. So we have all these updates, upgrades, etc. If we want to perform this, it's going to take up 871 megabytes of additional disk space, and it will probably take a little bit of time to download, upgrade, etc. So if you want to do this, go ahead and push your update. You absolutely don't have to be successful in the course, but just to provide clarification and understanding of how it's done and what it's doing, just wanted to point that out. Now, let's say we just wanted a tool, a specific tool. You see all these things in here. A lot of them are related to like Python, which is interesting because I do want to install a Python tool. So let's install a tool called pip. So what we're going to do is we're going to say apt install, And then the tool is called pip, but it is python-pip like this. So type that in, hit enter. It's going to go check for it. It's going to look for it, and it found it, which is great. If it weren't to find it, it would say something a little different. We can show you, like say, just hit some numbers in there. Say unable to locate that package. So you'll know you're on the right track with the package name here. So I'm going to go ahead and actually hit yes to install this. It's going to go out and download everything we need for pip. And you're going to see why pip is important here. So there is pip and there's pip3. Now both of those go out and do some installs for us. And we're going to go ahead and just say yes. And those installs are related to Python. So we're going to use a lot of tools in this course that are related to Python. And it's going to install those tools for us. So pip is for Python, pip3 is for Python 3. Now Python 3 is the latest and greatest. Python 2 is actually being deprecated in 2020 or end of service in 2020. So a lot of things are actually moving away from that now. So when we get into the Python section of the course, we're actually going to be working completely in Python 3 for this reason solely. So while we wait for this, let's go ahead and go out to the interwebs. And I'm just going to go to applications up here and then Firefox terminal.
So from here, as an update to the course, I want to introduce a tool and teach you also how to install a tool. So this is kind of serving two purposes here. So I want to go out to Google, and what we're going to do is we're going to look for a tool called Pimp My Kali, P-I-M-P, My Kali, just like that. Now this is written by a guy named DeWalt. He is a pillar of our community in terms of our Discord community. Is very helpful when it comes to the course. If you've ever been in the course Discord or looked at it, you will probably see that he is a part of it and he's there and he's helping out. He's fantastic. Now this is up to date. He does a great job of utilizing this, and what he's done is he's taken the new Kali Linux, which anything from 2020.1 and onward has kind of had some issues here or there, and he's created a nice script to fix all of those issues. Okay, so we don't have to go through and troubleshoot a lot of things throughout the course. This script just kind of goes in and fixes a lot of things that were wrong. So I really am appreciative of this script because it is fantastic. What we can do is learn from this as well, though. So what we can do is we could take this code and we could just copy it here. Okay, we can hit Control A, Control C, or you can hit copy on the clipboard. And what I want you to do is I want you to go out to a terminal. We're gonna go ahead and just sudo switch user, okay, and enter in our password. Now, we're going to install something from GitHub. So what we're doing, and this is very common, by the way, you're gonna see this happen throughout the course. We're gonna put this into a folder. So what I wanna do is change directories to a folder called opt, O-P-T, just like this, and hit enter. And we're going to put our file here. Now this is very common. A lot of people tend to put their downloads or installs into the opt folder. It's just a place to keep all of these. So this is a common thing to do and a good practice to get into if you've never done this before. So now what we're gonna do is we're just going to type in git clone, and then we're gonna paste it. So you can do Control-Shift-V as a shortcut, or right click and paste, hit enter, and you can see it started cloning. Now, once it's done cloning, all you have to do is change directory into the file name right here, or the folder name. So cd, we'll just type in Pimp My Kali, tab, hit enter. Okay, and from here, we can just do ls, look what's in here. Okay, so you can see pimpmykali.sh. We're gonna go ahead and just run that. So ./pimpmykali.sh, just like that, hit enter. All right, and we're going to run 0 here. Okay, and this is going to take a minute. So it's gonna go through and run all these upgrades that you see here. So what it's doing is it's fixing some of the issues that we have. So we're fixing Go when we have to install Go later. We're fixing Impacket, which has some issues on its own in 2020.1 and later. And we're also enabling root login. So there's a lot of things that we're doing here that help us out throughout the course and is just a nice overall upgrade. There are some other features here. So
as you'll see, we have the ability to downgrade from Metasploit 6. So if you do encounter issues in the course, you can come back and downgrade to Metasploit 5, which is what we are currently doing. But as you go through the course, Metasploit 6 might be working or more functional. As these tools upgrade and things go on, you have to kind of evaluate what's working, what's not working, and take it from there. So as the script gets updated constantly, be on the lookout for these things as they get added or removed. But for now, we're just running the 0. We're going through and just adding all these different tools in. You should see it scrolling along like this and should function pretty straightforward. So go ahead and let this install. The big takeaway here, and once you're done, go ahead, we're going to move on to the next video. But the big takeaway here is that you should be comfortable with using the apt package to go out and download tools. You should be comfortable with upgrading your system through apt, and you should be comfortable now with going out to the web, GitHub at least, and going and downloading a folder or cloning a repository off of GitHub and installing it on your own. It's very straightforward. If the GitHub is good, the GitHub will tell you, hey, here's how you install it, and it'll say these are your instructions. Like right here, it says here, git clone, cd into it, /pip_my_Kali. Straightforward. And most GitHubs are like this. So as we download tools in the course, you're going to get more practice with this and understand it better. But from here, you're going to just take it and go. And here you can see something that we talked about is that we lost the ability in 2020.1 to use root. This will allow you to run root in Kali if you want. Here, we're just going to type in no. Unless you know what you're doing, you could type in yes. But again, as stated in the sudo video, if you are not familiar with Linux, it's best practice just to keep hanging out in sudo and utilizing it that way as a low-level user. And again, we're just going to let this run, and I will catch you over in the next video. So there's one more tool I want to install because I use it quite a bit throughout the course as my go-to note editor, and I'll talk some alternatives as well, but I just want to make sure that you have it installed and you have it at your disposal if you want to use it. It's not the only text editor in Linux, and I'll show you those options, but that tool is going to be called gedit. So if you just do apt install gedit like this, actually let's do a sudo apt install like that, enter in our password, and then go ahead and just hit enter for yes. We're going to let this install, and it should be pretty quick. Now, what this is going to allow us to do is just have a text editor option. You're going to see this in use in the next video, but we get to say gedit test.txt as an example, and it'll bring up this text editor. Plain and simple, that's all it is. Now, you'll get some warnings like this. If you see a warning, just ignore it. Don't even worry about it. As long as you're able to get into the text editor and edit, that's fine. I'm going to close this out without saving. Another thing that you can do is you can use mousepad and just say test.txt. That's fine. And you can use nano, test.txt, same thing. And you'll see these throughout the course, so don't worry about having to memorize them right now. But there's a few different text editing options. I just wanted to install gedit and show you gedit because I use it so much throughout the course, and they removed it from Kali Linux in 2020.1, I believe. So I just want you to be familiar with it and know how to use it if you want to. So that's it. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next video.
Okay, so this is my second time recording this video. The first time I forgot to turn my microphone on and performed for my cat. So she approved of it. Let's see if you approve of it the second time around now that I have a little bit of practice. So what we're going to be talking today is we're going to be talking about viewing, creating, and editing files. So I've already showed you the echo command. If you recall, we used echo to create a file, right? We created a hello.txt. And we can just echo hello out to the terminal. We could say echo hello, and it'll say hello back. So what we can do with echo is we can use it to write to a file. So if we were to say echo hey, and then we write it to hey.txt, well, we can look and see that hey.txt is here. And you can see my files from the previous one, so I'm trying to come up with more ways of saying hello. but we're going to use hey.text here. So if we cat hey.text, all cat does is print out to the screen what is in a file. It says hey. Okay, so let's say we want to append cat, or we want to append hey.text. Well, we can tab up here. What if we just say hey again? And we've got this greater than symbol here, and we're just putting it into the hey.text file. Well, that didn't work. We didn't append it. We actually overwrote it. So what can we use to actually append this here? What we can do is we could say hey again, right? Just to give us something different. And we can add a second greater than symbol here. So now if we cat the file, you can see that we actually appended to the end of it. So this becomes incredibly useful when we are either adding stuff to a list, say we're gathering IP addresses and we just want to combine our lists, or when we're creating a series of commands and we're going to use those commands to send all at once. We're going to cover that later when we talk about file transfers in the penetration testing section, where we use a set of commands like this on a Windows machine to actually transfer files via FTP. It's just so much easier than typing them all in one by one. We can create a little document and run the document. So this becomes useful when we have a series of commands, and for other reasons as well, as you'll learn as you go on in your Linux career. So we've talked about echo and we've talked about cat. So let's talk about some other ways to create a file. We can use something called touch and just say new file.txt. And if we ls, you could see that new file.txt is here. But if we cat new file, there's nothing in there because we haven't put anything in there yet. So there's a few things that we can do. We could use echo and append the file, right? We could also use a tool called Nano. Now Nano is a terminal text editor. There are other terminal text editors like Vi and Vim. I don't prefer those personally. I like Nano the most. Some people have their preferences. So I encourage you to play around with any of them as you wish. Vi and Vim are the other two. But for this course, we're going to be using Nano. So if I say nano new file.txt, I could type whatever I want in here. And we're going to be using Nano a lot to create scripts, to create Python scripts, and to edit shellcode as we get into a little bit of exploit development. So I'm going to hit Control X, I'm going to hit Y for saving, and then we'll save it to new file.txt. If we cat this, now it says, hey, I could type whatever I want in here. So that's one way of editing it. Another way of editing it is using a graphical interface. So we can use gedit and say new file. And if you don't like using a terminal, you're more than welcome to use gedit here. Just type in new line here and save it. And I like using gedit. It's a lot cleaner because I can, highlight and delete. I don't have to use my keyboard to navigate around like I do in the terminal. So if you have the option to use gedit, for sure, but sometimes you're going to be on another machine that's not your own or is headless and doesn't have a GUI, that you're going to have to use Nano. So get comfortable using both. So we save this. Let's go ahead and cat it out and see what happens. Okay, you can see that the new line is in there. So really that's the overview that I wanted to cover. So just know that you can create files pretty much using echo, touch, and actually you can create files using Nano as well. If you say nano, this is new.txt, I'll just say hello, Control X, save it. If you ls, you can see this is new.txt is right here. So you can use all of these tools in different ways to create files. It's completely up to you how you want to do it. Personally, when I'm creating a file, I use Nano and I just create a new shell script, Python script, text document that way. You could also do it using gedit as well. So just know that we're going to be using these a lot and try to get comfortable with these. And from here, we're going to be moving into controlling Kali services. So we're just going to briefly talk about what services you need running on boot and how to do that.
last video in the section, and this is going to be one of my favorites. So what we're going to be talking about is scripting with Bash. I'm going to show you some cool tricks that we can do to kind of narrow down some of the results that we get, and then I'm going to show you how you can automate some of that process, and we'll take that and even write out some for loops and one-line loops, which this might not make any sense right now, and that's absolutely okay, but by the time the video is done, hopefully it does. So the first thing I want to show you is I want to show you how we're going to write a ping sweep. So we're going to write a ping sweeper. Basically, we're going to go out and say, I want to ping a device. If that device is alive, go ahead and show me that result. And we're going to sweep an entire network. So what we're going to do first is we're going to identify a device that's alive so we can test this out and then build upon that. So you can go ahead and type in ifconfig and then just hit enter. Now my Ethernet here is on a NATed network. So I'm running through a different IP address subnet here. So this one is 192.168.57.150. My actual IP address is on a .4.x here. So I'm going to, for this example, I'm going to be pinging 192.168.4.29. However, and you can see here's the ping that we're getting back. However, if you are unsure of a IP address in your house that is active or your subnet in your house, that's okay. You can just run 57.1 for this example. You might not get a lot of return results. However, you might only get 1 or 2 when we do this sweep. So I advise you to figure out what your IP address is. That's a good challenge anyway. And if you are familiar with networking, which you should be at this point, then you should be able to determine the IP address of your home network. But if you do not do that, then you can use 57.1 or whatever your IP address is here on this third octet. So that will also work if you see that. All right, so I'm going to clear this. Now, what are we noticing when we're pinging? We're pinging this address and we're getting some data back. Now, if we ping an active address, you can see that we get, okay, 64 bytes from 192.168.4.29. It's saying it's active. We're getting details back. If we were to ping something, let me do like 41, where we just don't get any data back. Okay, and let's try this one more time. Let's try this a different way. Let's do like a count of 1. -C of 1, we'll do a count of 1. It's going to try to send one packet over and see if it works. Nothing's happening, right? It's trying to transmit that packet. You could see that it's getting 0 received here, where here's getting 4 received. No data is coming back. It's just not doing anything for us. So the thing that we can identify here is what's the big difference. If we look at line 1 and 2 versus line 1 and 2, what are we seeing when we get data back? Well, the big difference here is well, 2 of them, I guess. We see that we get this response, right? That's big difference. And then down here, it'll say, hey, we received some packets if it's not 0. Now, the easy way to do this is to look at a line that says, hey, we received data, which is this line here, okay? Now, what I want to do is I want to narrow this down just a little bit. What we're going to say is we're just going to do a ping of 1 time. So I'm going to clear this. I'm going to bring it back to this like this. I'm going to do a count of 1. And that should just ping once. And that's perfect. We don't need to ping endlessly. We just want to make sure we can ping once and then we're done. Okay, and then from here, I'm going to put this into a text file. I'm just going to call this ip.txt, just like that. So when I cat out ip.txt, now you can see that I have this file. It's stored. I don't have to run the command again. We're good to go. So what we're going to do now is we can take this and then we can start gathering data based off of what we see here. So what I want to do is I want to just extract this one line here, the 64 bytes from 192.168.4.29. And the best way to do that is with a command called grep. So grep is going to look for a specific term or phrase, and we can do that, and it's going to pull down any line that has that term or phrase. So if I say grep here, and then I just put in quotation 64 bytes, like this, now when I cat out this, all I'm pulling down is this line, and it's even highlighting it for us. It's saying here's the line that we see, 64 bytes from 192.168. Okay, so we've extracted just the one line. And why am I extracting this line? Well, if we're building out a ping sweeper, what I want to do is I want to sweep every single IP within a specific subnet. So say this .4, right? I want to ping
4.1.2.3 all the way through 254, 255. I want to see if I can get through all the IP addresses in a subnet. So what we're going to do is we're going to ping every single one of them and say, hey, are you up? Are you there? And we're going to do it with a count of 1. And we're going to say, are you there? Okay. And if they're there, they're going to say, yeah, I'm here. 64 bytes. Here's my response. And it's going to say 64 bytes from this IP address. So we want to extract the IP addresses to say, yeah, we're alive. That's basically our goal here. So when we run this on a bigger scale, which is what we're going to do, we're going to need to grep out this information and extract this information to where we only just get the IP address back. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to start narrowing down and grabbing this IP address, and then I'm going to show you how we're going to take this all in one instance and run it and then extract IP addresses. So from here, what I want to do is I want to do another command. So every time we pipe, we're saying, hey, run this command, then with that command, run this command, then also run this command too. So we're going to keep running this command on top of this to narrow things down. So here's what we're doing here. We're going to run a command called cut. And with cut, we're going to say, I want to cut something out of this. We need to provide it what is called a delimiter. So we do a -D like this. And the delimiter I'm going to use is a space. And then I'm going to say -F for field, and then I'm going to say 4. Okay, what is this doing? Well, it's saying, hey, I want to cut this line that you're getting back on a space. So the delimiter is a space. So here's a space, here's a space, here's a space. And it says, I want to count up to 4 to grab that data. So 1, 2, 3, 4 right here. So if we say 4 here, like this, we hit enter, we're grabbing that specific IP address because we're doing it by spaces. If we did it on 3, what do you think we're going to grab? We're going to grab the word from. So you can see here's from. So what I want to do is grab the IP. So we're going to use this cut just like this, use our delimiter, and then get to the correct field position that we want to grab the IP address. All right, so we've got the IP address. Now there's only one thing wrong here with this IP address, is that there is a little colon on the end of it. We just want this without a colon at all. We want it just like this. Now there's a couple ways we can do this. We could use something called sed. Sed's a little bit complicated and a little bit advanced, I would say, for where we're at right now. So I'd rather teach you an easier way to do this. And that is called translate. So with translate, all we're gonna do is we're going to do one more pipe like this, and we're just gonna say TR for translate, a -D for a delimiter again, and then we're gonna say we wanna get rid of this. And that's it, we're just getting rid of this. Okay, so if we run this one more time, now you can see that we've successfully extracted this IP address out. That's our goal, that's all we wanted to do. Now, how can we apply this to something bigger? How can we make this part of a bigger script? That is the question, and we're gonna do that. So what I want you to do is I just want you to copy this, okay? Copy this entire line, and we're going to go into a mouse pad. So let's copy this selection, and I'm gonna clear my screen. I'm just gonna say mouse pad, and we're gonna call this ipsweep.sh. Okay, so this is going to be a bash script, and I'm gonna make this bigger. And the first thing we're gonna do with our bash script is we have to declare that it's a bash script. We're gonna say #bang right here, or shebang is what we'd call this, /bin/bash. This allows the machine to know when we run this allows bash to know, hey, we're calling this, here's the location of bash, this is what we're running with the script. You're also gonna see this when we use Python as well. You'll see the declaration here at the top, or when we're calling this out. So I'm gonna go ahead and Control S and save this. That'll add some nice color to this, so when we're coding this out, we get to see in color. I like that a lot. I'm gonna actually make this a little bit smaller and then make this like this here so we can get the whole picture. Okay, so what I wanna do is I wanna paste in what we just wrote. So I'm just gonna Control V here and paste that in. So we don't need to do a cat of an IP address here. In this instance, instead, we're gonna change this back. We're gonna ping. Remember, we wanna ping every device in the network. So we want to ping, say if we're pinging 192.168.4.x, okay, we wanna ping that. And we can leave this like this for now. Don't worry about changing anything here. This is just gonna be a placeholder. We're gonna do a little bit of extra syntax here to make this work. So we're going to write what is called a for loop. So we're going to say for, and I'll explain what this does here in a second. You're also going to see this again when we get into Python and coding. And so you'll be able to understand more and more about loops and what for loops are, while loops, etc. They're very, very useful and very common in coding and scripting. So I'm going to say for IP in, and then I'm going to say sequence 1 through 254. Now, very important, this character here is not an apostrophe, okay? This is not an apostrophe. This is the little line, I don't know what it's called. It's above the tilde next to your escape button on your keyboard. So it's this right here, okay? It's like a backwards apostrophe almost. I'm sure there's a term for it, I just don't know it. So you come in here and you say, okay, for IP address in sequence 1 through 254. And I'm going to explain what all this does in a second. I want you just to type this out for now. I want you to say do. All right. And then I want you to come down here and we're going to say ampersand on this line and we're going to say done. I'm going to explain what all this means. Okay, so this is a loop that we've just created. What we're saying is for the IP address, and we're just declaring this. This could be Bob if you wanted to. I'm just making it a name or a term that's easy for us to remember. So we're going to say for IP. But if you want to call this Bob, call it Bob. For IP in sequence 1 through 254. So what sequence is doing is it's saying, hey, I want to count everything from 1 to 254. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way to 254. This for loop means I'm going to do this every single time. So for IP in 1, for IP in 2, for IP in 3, we're going to run this command until we're done. So until this sequence has run 255 times, it's done. Okay, and now we're going to say, I want to do a count of $IP. So what we're saying here is for IP in sequence 1 through 254, go ahead and do a ping -c for a count of 1, 192.168.4.254. And here we're going to say .1, .2, .3. Every time this loops over and over and over, it's going to be incrementing that number through this sequence. That's all we're doing. This is a basic loop, okay? So we're going to keep going through and through and through. Now, this will work. If you plugged in your hard-coded IP address here, this will absolutely work. Now, we can improve this just a little bit if we want to. So what's going on here is what we're going to say is if we wanted to run this, we would just do // and then IP sweep, okay? And this would work. That's fine. But we can make this a little bit better from a coding perspective. We can come in here and we can give this a $1. And that means argument 1. So what we're saying here is I want to give an argument instead. So if you want to be technical, this first /IP sweep.sh, that is argument 0. So you can consider this $0. Argument 1 would be what you type after that. So this would be argument 1, argument 2, etc. So in this case, what we can do is we could say, I want to run 192.168.4 like this, and this will run the .1, .2, .3 after it. So you provide the argument, it places that here in argument 1, and then it does the rest for you. So this way you can specify your network, and if you wanted to ping multiple networks, you don't have to come back in here and keep changing this. It just works. So super easy. This is a great little script for a /24 type subnet, okay? Okay, so let's go ahead and try running this really quick. I'm gonna just Control S, save this. I'm gonna close it. We're gonna do a chmod +x on IP sweep. If it'll allow us to, we might have to do a, okay, let's do LSLA real quick, make sure it worked. It sure did. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. We're going to run the IP sweep, and we're going to say 192.168. You just put in your IP here, and I'm gonna run that, all right? And you could see all the devices that are coming back within my network here. I'm gonna go ahead and hit Control C, cancel this out. And so this is grabbing all the different devices in my network. Now that's great. That works out really well. But what we can do is improve this. What if I typed in a, what if I didn't type anything at all? What if I just hit enter here? Now I'm just getting all kinds of pings unknown, and it's going off of some of the stuff I was doing before, but it just causes all kinds of issues and errors, right? So you can see I'm trying to hit Control C. It's taking its time to break. Here we get issues because we're just allowing any sort of argument here. What we need to do is we need to fix this up just a little bit. So what we can say is we can come back in here and just go mousepad ipsweep.sh and come in here and let's add a little bit extra. Oh, and I also left this in here. Don't leave this in here. That's why that was running twice. Okay, so what we're doing here is we need to add in a statement. What we're going to do is we're going to add in a if statement. If statements are conditions. We're saying, hey, if this condition is met, do something for us. If it's not met, then go ahead and do something else. All right. So we're going to say if, and we're going to just put in here $1 is equal to nothing, then we're going to go ahead and just say then echo you forgot an IP address. Echo syntax, something like this. We'll just say IP sweep.sh and we'll go 192.168.4 like that. Okay. And then if we did do this correctly, if we do have an argument inside of argument 1, then we're going to say else, do all of this here, and be done. And then we're going to end our if statement with fi. Now, this script, or this resemblance of this script, is not one of my own, by the way. This goes credit to something I've modified over time, but the original credit definitely goes to Georgia Weidman. I remember seeing this in her course a long, long time ago when I was first getting started. And she did a great job of teaching this. This is just a modification of this script. So I just want to make sure that all credit goes to her. But looking at this, let's break this down really quick before we run this again. We've got an if statement. We said if argument 1 doesn't equal anything, then you're going to echo back out and say, hey, you forgot an IP address. Here's the syntax. If it does include something, then we're going to go ahead and come in here and say, let's run our for statement, our for loop, and run through it, and then we're going to end our if here. The only thing that I'm doing uniquely here is I'm including this ampersand, which is going to run this command multiple times at once. This is a good way to explain it. Basically, we have a couple ways of doing this. We could say like this. We could put a command here, and this will run one at a time. It'll say, okay, for 1, for 2, for 3. This allows multiple instances of this loop to run at once and just speeds things up. I could show you the difference between that. So I'm going to go ahead and just Control S, save this. I'm going to go ahead and just run this script real quick. Now let's try running it without anything here. Okay, now look, it says you forgot an IP address. So look, we did that correctly. Now let's go ahead and add the 192.168.4, run it. And you can see, okay, it's sweeping, but it's taking its sweet time, especially for the IP addresses that are going to hang. Like if I don't have a .2 or .3, it's going to take a while. So I'm going to Control C and get out of this if it'll let me. And it looks like it's actually going to hang. So what we can do is we can come back in. I'm going to open a new tab real quick just while that's waiting. And I'm just going to say mousepad, and we're just going to go back into ipsweep.sh. It's in this folder. There we go. Okay. So from here, I'm going to change this back to the ampersand, and I'm going to save it. I just want you to see the difference really quick and why I run it like this. So ipsweep.sh 192.168.4. You can see it's picking everything up really fast. All right. What I can do now is I can run this and then store this into like ips.txt, something like that. Just like found IP addresses. Okay, so now if I cat ips.txt, I have all the IP addresses I just found, and I found them that fast versus this, which may still be going, and it is, and I can't even kill it. I'm just gonna close this out. Okay, so this is the big difference there with that ampersand and the speed of what it is capable of doing. So with all that being said, we could take this and do one more thing. So I wanna show you how we can utilize a one-liner. These are called one-line statements in Bash, and we can do similar to what we just did and accomplish that in this command line. So now we have an IP address. We have a list of IP addresses. Let's say that we want to run nmap. Now, we haven't gotten to nmap yet. You don't need to really know about it. Just know that it is a tool that allows us to go out and do port scanning. Okay, so typically we would just say something like nmap, and we might do something like dash T4 dash A dash P dash, like this. This is just saying, I want to run nmap scan, I want to look at everything, and I want to scan all ports. This is just an example. You can just run nmap IP address like this, and that would be fine too. Like we could just go 192.168.4.29, and we'll do a quick nmap scan. Okay, but what we can't do here is we can't just say, hey, I want to run, well, we could say, I want to run nmap for everything in .0/24. The issue is it's going to take time looking and finding what IP addresses are valid here. If we have a list, we can automate this process quite a bit. We can just come in here and we can say something a little bit different. We can say, hey, for IP, we're using the same kind of syntax, in $, and we're going to put parentheses here. We're going to say cat, and then we're going to say ips.txt, and then we're just going to do this. We're going to say do nmap $IP, and then again, we have the option of doing done, or we can do ampersand done, just like this. Okay. I'm just going to do done here as an example and just show you. So this is really easy. We're saying, hey, for every IP address in this list, and all we're doing is we're catting out this IP list that we just had. So it's going to take the first IP, then run the nmap scan, and it's going to come back and run the next one. So until this list is completely done, it's going to keep going through this loop. That's all it is, a simple loop. And then we're going to say done. It's going to take that IP address. It's going to start scanning it. It's going to go through and hopefully find information and go in a loop. So this is a quick way to automate some of this process. I actually do this with a lot of my scripts where I will do some probing, see if anything is out there that's alive, put it into an IP file, and you're going to see this later in the course, and then nmap scan that. So think about this. Hopefully this gets your wheels spinning on what you can do to really start scripting some of this stuff out. And this is going to be the first time you get your hands dirty with scripting. We're going to go on again with this, and we're going to get more advanced as we go. But this should be a good introductory lesson to you on how we can build a simple tool and automate a lot of this process fairly easily with just a little bit of command line syntax. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the next section, and I will see you over there.